Narumi Masaru slowly regained consciousness as he heard someone's voice. He opened his eyes with difficulty, not understanding why the alarm was still ringing. As his mind cleared, his gaze fell on a strange silhouette with ears sticking up. He froze, mentally exclaiming, "These were real rabbit ears." Having finally come to, Masaru sat up abruptly, looking around in shock. In front of him in the forest sat an unfamiliar girl, and everything that was happening looked frighteningly real. Unable to contain his curiosity, he reached out to her ears. The girl reacted in surprise, not even having time to move away. The fingers gently touched his ear, and Narumi felt warmth and softness. He immediately knew they were real. Hearing her indignant question, the young man quickly apologized. Embarrassment was written on his face, because he had clearly gone too far with the touch. He still couldn't believe his eyes and hesitantly asked why she wore rabbit ears. The question sounded naive but sincere. The girl calmly explained that it was not an accessory. She belonged to the rabbit race. The ears were a real part of her body. Narumi repeated the name of the race in shock, barely realizing how far this world was from the reality he was used to. The girl only asked if she could stand up. He took a deep breath and finally acknowledged the obvious. This was not a dream, but real life in another world. Staring into the void, Narumi Masaru slowly realized the incredible. He had been reborn. The thought sounded clearly in his head, as if splitting the old personality. The young man stood on a hillock, looking out over the vastness of the new world. He already knew its name, Alstacia. This was his new reality. The realization of what was happening hit like a bolt of lightning. Masaru's face twisted in panic. Everything he knew was in the past. Masaru clutched his head, turning over questions of survival in his mind. Without a home, food, or even a toilet, starting from scratch was too much. Mei froze as the boy suddenly turned around. His behavior was becoming increasingly strange, and she began to watch him with caution. When Masaru tried to speak, Mei suddenly interrupted him. Her voice was calm, but with a hint of detachment. She had her own plans. He stepped closer, asking if they could go together. The answer was hesitant. Even Mei herself was unsure whether she should take him with her. The girl looked away and explained in a reserved tone. If she brought a person with her, the others would get angry. Her voice was filled with the usual wariness. They stood in silence in the middle of the forest. Mei repeated softly but clearly, "People hate non-humans, and adults are especially cruel." Masaru thought about what was said, recalling scenes from games and manga. If all this was real, then perhaps even slavery was here, a common occurrence. And sadly, it was humans who seemed to be the ones causing harm to other races. The young man exchanged uncertain glances with the rabbit girl and asked her to act as a go-between. He hoped that she would be able to establish contact with the locals for him. When they noticed someone approaching among the trees, the young man was excited. However, the girl was wary as she said, "There shouldn't have been anyone." A menacing figure, a huge hobgoblin, appeared before them. The girl's face was distorted with horror, and Masaru was dumbfounded with shock. The girl screamed in panic, calling Masaru's name. She did not hide her fear. Meeting such a monster seemed fatal. As the monster stepped closer, Narumi instinctively shielded her with his body. He barely knew what he was doing, but his body moved on its own. Despite the trembling in his voice, the young man said that he would distract the monster. He told the girl to run, it was her only chance. He firmly told her that she shouldn't go to the village if it was really that dangerous. He didn't want to bring trouble to her loved ones. The girl pushed him forward with trembling hands. Her cry was filled with determination and desperation. She could not let him die just like that. As they separated, one to fight, the other to flee, Masaru admitted to himself. He didn't know what he was doing. But delay would have been even worse. And yet, despite the fear and confusion, something inside him lit up. The girl had shown him trust, and now nothing could stop him. The young man desperately tried to attract the monster's attention, waving his arms and screaming loudly. He did everything he could to get the threat away from the girl. He was thrown back by a powerful blow, barely able to maintain consciousness. Even though the blow passed by glancingly, the damage was noticeable. The monster launched another furious attack, aiming straight at the center. It clearly perceived the boy as a threat. Lying on the ground and breathing heavily, Masaru desperately searched for any ability or power. Inwardly, he regretted that he did not have any special skills. In an attempt to somehow defend himself, he threw the first thing he could get his hands on at his opponent. It turned out to be an ordinary plastic bottle. The monster froze in shock after receiving a bottle in the face. The guy looked no less surprised by what was happening than his opponent. The creature approached mockingly, clearly not taking the threat seriously. The boy tensed, realizing that he had almost no options left. He internally resigned himself to possible death. When the monster raised its club, it looked like the end. Suddenly, the situation turned upside down. The enemy lost his balance and crashed into the ground. The guy watched this turn in shock. He sat next to the fallen monster, not fully understanding what had happened, a mixture of relief and confusion written across his face. Masaru looked lost, thinking that it was the policeman who wanted to clarify the situation. He suddenly received a slap in the face before he could understand what was happening. It turned out to be a goddess, and she said that it was difficult for her to place him near people. She asked why he was so far away from them. The interlocutor indignantly recalled how much effort had been spent to hide him from danger, and how close he had come to death. Masaru just looked at her in confusion, unable to find anything to say in response. The young man recoiled in fear, recognizing the towering figure as a familiar goddess. The woman in the shining robe looked at him reproachfully, expressing disappointment and incomprehension. The guy stared at the goddess's figure in bewilderment, slowly realizing what was happening. She told him, with a slight smile and a cheerful tone, about a certain lost dispute between the gods, because of which he ended up in another world. Despite the seriousness of the topic, she acted as if it were a simple formality that did not cause her any doubts. He didn't understand why she was so serious. Hearing that this was reality, he began to panic, trying to prove that none of this applied to him. His protests were dashed by the stranger's calm determination. A sudden shock took hold of him, as everything that was happening finally became inseparable from the truth. His eyes widened. This was no longer a dream. The goddess, as if anticipating his fear, offered something that would make the transition to the new world easier. Her voice sounded calm but confident. With unexpected seriousness, she announced the blessing. 3 glowing tickets appeared in front of him. She explained that she would only give him 3 tickets. The young man looked at the tickets with confusion. He expected magical weapons, but received what looked like game items. Having received confirmation, he was surprised to realize that these tickets actually gave abilities. He even thought that the idea wasn't so bad. However, at that moment, a strange voice was heard. A new figure confidently took over the initiative and uttered a number with a grin. She had more tickets in her hands than the first goddess. She descended on the goddess's shoulder. An unfamiliar hand descended. The mood changed dramatically. The tall woman grabbed the goddess by the collar with a serious expression, clearly leading her into a conversation. Masaru, stunned, did not even have time to object. She introduced herself as Hera with a polite smile and apologized on behalf of the others, who, she said, should have asked for forgiveness themselves. Another girl stood next to her, bowed low, and admitted that her husband Zeus and another person had caused a lot of inconvenience. The boy's eyes widened when he heard the familiar names. He couldn't believe that these were characters from Greek mythology. Hera explained that he was supposed to receive a blessing as part of the divine contract. It all seemed like a system in which even the gods had their own rules. She added that intervention is only possible before being sent to the new world. After that, even the deities will not be able to change anything. Hera then pointed out openly that the former goddess had tried to keep some of the tickets she had won in a dispute with Zeus. She was supposed to give 8, but had offered only 3. The young man grimaced in displeasure and mentally called her a useless goddess. He felt cheated. The goddess, not wanting to hear this, panicked and covered her ears and began to scream, as if she could still maintain her dignity. Hera, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines with a stony face. Meanwhile, a strange mechanism, something like a slot machine, was activated. The procedure for selecting skills began. The goddess explained that, although she can grant skills, it does not mean that everything will be as desired. Therefore, a lottery is used, and tickets are needed for this purpose. He noticed an extra feature on the machine. If you use 10 tickets at once, you get 1 bonus spin. The hero agreed without hesitation, clapping his hands. The decision was made. Hera promised to add 1 ticket from herself and 1 from another goddess, as a token of apology. So he had exactly 10. The goddess proudly declared that Masaru should be grateful for the opportunity to obtain as many as 11 skills. The hero reluctantly agreed, while another goddess modestly approved of the event. With excitement on his face, Masaru started the mechanism. He was ready for his 11th attempt. The first skill was useful. It was the ability. Evaluation 3. The goddess watched with interest. Next came mercenary. Hera noted that he was lucky so far. Then he got the skill Disassembly 2. Everything went in the spirit of the craft bias. And finally, Mining 3. The lottery was surprisingly practical. The next skill was Leatherworking 3. The roulette continued to give out exclusively craft skills. The goddesses watched the process, discussing Masaru's behavior. One of them noted that although he was silent, he clearly knew his business. The 8th skill that dropped was a rare skill, Item Box. This caused a slight stir. The next skill was Blacksmithing 2. The theme of useful but non-combat skills continued. Next came Craft 3, and it became clear that Masaru was ready for a career as a carpenter or builder. The next one was Healing Magic 1. Although the level was modest, the skill was still magical. Next, the woodcarving skill was displayed, but its level was not very high either. His skills were so low that the goddesses were confused. The skill map dropped, allowing you to see the area within a radius of 3 kilometers. This was an unexpected and useful bonus. When all the skills were displayed on the screen, Masaru was puzzled. The goddesses were sweating from awkwardness, and he himself did not understand why the skills were so specialized. Then the goddesses decided to send him back. His skills were so low that everyone lost hope, and the hero himself still did not understand what was happening. The girl suddenly interrupted his thoughts, sternly reminding him of the value of the tickets he had received. Her voice sounded so serious that he involuntarily froze. He tried to justify himself, but the goddess would not accept explanations. She demanded that he act with caution. Looking around at his surroundings, he was still trying to comprehend what was happening. The world he had found himself in was clearly not Earth. The goddess's stern gaze made it clear that in this world, delay could be fatal. The hero stood there hesitating, but her words made him pull himself together. He realized that if he wanted to survive, he would have to act first. He approached the fallen enemy, gritting his teeth. There was no time to be distracted. He had to finish what he had started. Victinas praised him for his good work and offered to view his status. The goddesses explained that he only needed to worry about discovering his qualities. Masaru blinked in confusion as he looked at the window with parameters that had popped up in front of him. Everything that was happening seemed like a dream. However, the growth of his characteristics confirmed that he really did find himself in another world, where strength grows through experience. The goddess calmly stated that the fight with the goblin was a good lesson for him. She was about to move him to the nearest village, but the boy suddenly stopped her. He explained that he was waiting for a girl she promised to return. The goddess noted with slight surprise that people rarely appeared in these places. Before she could finish speaking, a group of rabbit girls jumped out of the forest. Among them, Masaru recognized a familiar girl who joyfully shouted his name. She ran and hugged him, her voice shaking as she expressed joy that he was alive. Masaru smiled with relief, hugging her back. The eldest of the warriors came closer and thanked Masaru for saving the girl. The others looked at him with respect. Suddenly, one of them asked worriedly about the wandering goblin. Masaru pointed in the direction where they had left the body. When they got there, their amazement knew no bounds. The goblin was defeated. One of the girls asked in bewilderment how he managed it alone. Masaru awkwardly scratched the back of his head and admitted with a slight smile that he had simply dodged until the monster hit its head on a rock. Then he had simply finished it off. Masaru looks around, finding himself the center of attention of the bunny girls. In an awkward silence, he tries to figure out how to proceed. Realizing he has nowhere to go, he anxiously asks if he can stay with them in the village. His plea sounds sincere and helpless. One of the warriors smiled and suggested that they discuss everything on the way and assured him that they would accept him since he was in trouble. Hearing this, Masaru beamed with happiness, unable to contain his emotions. His eyes filled with tears of gratitude. The warriors confirmed. He had protected Mei from the hobgoblin, risking himself. The girls sincerely thanked him, calling him Oni-chan. They invited Masaru to go with them to meet the chieftain. He readily agreed. As they walked, Masaru thanked Mei and noticed that she hadn't said her name yet. The girl extended her hand with a smile and introduced herself. He was surprised to hear her name. May. May noticed his confusion and asked if everything was okay. He waved her off sheepishly, saying that everything was fine. Then May turned to him, saying that it was her turn. She clearly had something important in mind. Masaru introduced himself with a warm smile, looking straight ahead. He extended his hand to the girl with the bunny ears and asked her to call him simply Masaru. In response, she happily grabbed his hand. Looking ahead, Masaru admitted to himself that he didn't know what was waiting for him next. The path seemed foggy and full of uncertainty. Despite his doubts, he was determined that from now on he would live freely in this new world. Their clasped hands symbolized the beginning of a new chapter. Masaru recalled how it all began. An ordinary day, a ride home from work at the home center. Suddenly he found himself before the shining goddess Victinis, who called him into this world. From that moment on, everything in his life was determined by her. Regardless of any of his wishes, everything now depended on her decisions. While gaining skills, luck turned against him, not a single combat skill. Everything he gained seemed useless for battle. And the moment he found himself in the new world, a goblin attacked him. Before he could come to his senses, he had to flee from the furious attack. Thinking back to when they arrived at the village, Masaru was surprised to realize that he had actually survived. The girl with the rabbit ears called out to him happily, as if to confirm that he was no longer alone. Masaru looked into the distance in amazement. The village of rabbit people spread out before him. He realized that he had arrived at a place where his life could begin anew. The girl with the ears happily invited him inside, telling him that this was now his home too. Masaru couldn't help but smile as he looked at the bustling settlement. They walked through the village while May talked about life here. Masaru was amazed at how easily the villagers helped each other, despite the simple conditions. The girl assured him with sincere warmth that he was now part of their family. Masaru could not hold back his emotions and quietly thanked her. He looked around at the dwellings made of simple materials and noted their similarity to ancient Japanese settlements. Even the fences here were tied with ropes. Masaru learned that the village was only 2 years old. He realized how hard it was for its inhabitants. His face involuntarily became serious. One of the guards suggested that he meet the chief first. Masaru nodded willingly, feeling that it was important. They were already waiting for them at the chieftain's hut. The village elder smiled affably and called him by name. The chief admitted that he had doubted him, but when he saw him, he realized that the rumors were true. He looked young, which surprised the new guest. Masaru politely thanked them for the welcome and offered his help. He felt that he wanted to repay the kindness that had been shown to him. He awkwardly admitted that without an escort, he would have simply gotten lost. However, the chief simply waved him off, assuring him that it was not a problem. The elder looked at him with gratitude and said that he knew that he had risked his life to save May. He wanted to express his gratitude personally. He greeted Masaru with a smile to their village. He and May listened to his words with interest. The chieftain said that from now on the boy would live in May's house. Masaru was surprised by this decision but did not argue. May lived with her mother, and it turned out she really needed help. She had lost her father in a monster attack. Some doubted how the girl would take the news about the neighbor, but May immediately smiled broadly and cheerfully said that she would be happy with him. Masaru gently patted her head and thanked her. He was glad that May accepted him so quickly. Before parting, they wished each other good night. They decided to discuss everything else the next day. Masaru listened carefully to the village chief, who said with a kind smile that there was no need to worry and that everything could be done at his own pace. He said goodbye to the chief and followed May. Despite his nervousness, he decided that he would be useful. Even though he had only just arrived in this world, he was going to do what he could. However, Masaru smiled to himself and thought that he would hardly be able to help. Everything that was happening seemed too new and unusual to him. He remembered his failures at his previous job and how often things fell through his fingers. Images of failure and clumsiness popped into his head, eroding his confidence. But the memories of the past did not prevent him from looking forward. He saw a chance to change his life and decided to at least try again. Masaru walked through the village, watching the daily lives of the rabbit villagers. Despite their smiles, he could feel that they were struggling to survive. He remembered his skills, not combat ones, but practical ones. It gave him an idea. Maybe he could really be useful. For a moment, he considered whether he should offer anything. Doubt showed on his face and he almost changed his mind about speaking. However, he suddenly exclaimed that he had an idea. His enthusiasm surprised those around him, but also made them happy. He explained that if he thought it through, his skills could actually be useful. The confidence in his voice said that he was ready to act. The young man suddenly addressed the assembled group with determination in his voice, asking if he could improve this village. His words caught everyone by surprise. The girl and the two adults with animal ears looked at him in surprise. One of the villagers asked doubtfully if the guy was really going to improve the village. Someone else enthusiastically confirmed this, and the guy himself confidently declared that he could improve all the buildings in this village for the sake of its inhabitants. Masaru happily remarked that, with this opportunity, he would finally have a role in the village. One of the villagers interrupted him by raising his hand and saying that he did not think his words were accidental. The elder looked at the young man seriously and said that if the newcomer immediately declared that he wanted to create a place for himself to live here, then this would only cause alarm and panic among the villagers. The villager asked the young man if he understood what was being said. He quietly replied that he did, but admitted that he was not very good at reading the atmosphere. The guy admitted that he can't leave everything as it is and wants to protect the village. He is ready to do everything possible for the safety of the residents. He added that he often made mistakes before, but thanks to this, he began to understand his actions. Masaru admitted that he didn't know what exactly he could do, but promised to do his best to benefit the village. One of the residents said that one must work with a clear mind, because anger will not change anything. The narrator noted that the hero had learned this during his previous job, and now he was full of hope. The elder asked the boy what he was going to do first. The young man, having cheered up, said that he could now begin work. Smiling, he added that he could see in his eyes that he sincerely wanted to help. He explained that he had been thinking about what might be useful to the village and wanted to do his best. The elder thanked him for his efforts, based on everything he had seen. He realized that he first needed to figure out what exactly his skills were. The guy noted that, thanks to the skill machine, he had many more skills available to him than before. He looked through the interface with interest and noticed that there were skills that he did not have before. He wondered what skill was first on his list and where the abilities that he had initially were. Deciding to act consistently, he decided to start with the skills that he could check right now. The young man looked in surprise at the knife that appeared in his hand and realized that his current skill was evaluating the item. He determined that the knife was slightly rusty, but still usable. One of the villagers gave him the knife, warning him to try not to break it. The boy noted that such skills could indeed be useful. He thought that now he only lacked training, experience, or knowledge to use his abilities to the fullest. The guy discovered he had the cut skill and decided to try using it without tools. He went to the tree and activated the ability, but nothing happened, which surprised him greatly. The guy suddenly cut down a tree with a skill, afraid of the consequences. He noted that it was dangerous and spent a significant amount of mana. Realizing that the ability, although simple, needed improvement, he decided to continue until he got tired. Then, with interest, he decided to try out construction skills. Masaru decided to try out the level 4 masonry skill and started with the simple task of creating a cube. He was surprised when he immediately got a perfectly smooth stone, even without grinding. He noted that he could use this skill without tools and wondered what would happen if he increased the size of the structure. The guy decided to use the new level 4 woodworking skill to dry a previously cut log. He realized that he could combine skills, since the level remained the same. The description said that the skill allowed him to dry and process wood without tools. He reasoned that if the wood was left untouched for a while, the moisture would evaporate, making the material less usable. The guy realized that conventional drying of wood takes a long time, from several months to several years, and although there are technologies that speed up the process, they are complex, and not everyone can do it. He wondered if his skill could dry the wood immediately, and, inspired by this possibility, decided not to delay and got down to business. The girl invited the boy to dinner at her mother's request, but when she came closer, she screamed in fear, noticing how exhausted he was lying by the tree. The boy muttered with relief that he seemed to be saved. She exclaimed in surprise that he looked even worse than after the encounter with the goblin, and demanded to know what he had been doing. The young man realized that he had experienced the same magical exhaustion he had read about earlier. He admitted that the log had been too big for him. although he managed to dry it. May suggested going home and was concerned about his condition. He thought that without too much effort he could achieve more if he continued. Inwardly, he felt ashamed of his weakness. When May returned home, she was greeted joyfully by the woman who had been preparing the food. She greeted the girl with a smile and said that she was glad to have her back. The boy introduced himself as Narumi Masaru and awkwardly greeted him. The woman with the ears, hearing his name, said that her name was Lulu and suggested that they not stand on ceremony. The girl enthusiastically declared that Masaru had saved her and then even defeated the goblin. Lulu, hearing this, finally understood what was going on and, with a smile, invited everyone to the table, announcing that there would now be a celebration. May's mother told the boy that they had almost nothing, but this house would at least protect him from the rain and wind. She smiled and invited him to make himself at home. Masaru accepted her words with a slight smile and replied that it was good. The young man sitting at the table with the family of rabbits realized that thanks to their kindness he could start a new life in this world. He admitted that he had no idea how to thank them, but he would try his best. He decided that from now on he would live a new life and do everything possible to justify their trust. Masaru looked ahead with determination and told himself that from tomorrow onwards he would begin to implement his plan to improve the village. Under the starry sky and the light of the moon, he was determined to change everything for the better. On Wednesday, at the entrance to the rabbit village, the boy and the villagers finally began construction. After much thought, he felt that this was real life. During construction, one of the participants, looking at the work, asked doubtfully whether it would be suitable. With a smile on his face, the young man said that the first thing they would do was strengthen the fence. He seemed full of enthusiasm and confidence in his plan. One of the warriors approached Masaru and told him that he had already heard about his intention to improve the village. The chief had informed him of this. The warrior enthusiastically admitted that he was very excited when he heard about it. One of the rabbits asked why Masaru started with strengthening the fence. He explained that he considered defense a priority. In response, the warrior supported his idea, noting that even if the monsters attacked, the village would not receive serious damage. For example, the goblins were quite easy to defeat. Masaru suggested strengthening the village fence with a stone from a nearby cliff. One of the warriors noted that the entire village would have to be fortified, but the rabbit girl assured them that they could handle it. The group discussed building a stronger fence using rocks from a nearby cliff, which could be taken in unlimited quantities. One of the villagers commented that it sounded great, but questioned whether there would be enough resources, since the fence would need to cover the entire village. He pointed out that it would require a huge amount of rocks, and they did not have enough labor. Masaru confidently stated that this would not be a problem. The guy enthusiastically stated that he had already visited the cliff with May that morning and had taken some stones with him to strengthen the fence. The young man pulled out a whole bunch of stones from his inventory, astonishing everyone around him. He was surprised that this skill caused such delight, because he considered it quite ordinary. The protagonist decides that it is better not to advertise his unusual skill so as not to attract unnecessary attention. Instead, he suggests that everyone get down to business, move the stones, and begin building the wall. When Masaru suggested that they begin moving the stones, the villagers enthusiastically took up the idea and immediately rushed to do the work. He had not expected such agility and quickly stopped them, exclaiming that they should wait at least a second. He warns that if you stack the stones incorrectly, they will fall. The protagonist is surprised and guesses that the stones need to be stacked in a special way, after which he asks permission to try his own method. The protagonist demonstrates how to properly lay stones into a wall. He emphasizes the need to use more small stones and make sure there are no voids behind them. This results in a denser and more stable masonry, but he notes that even such a wall is still vulnerable to attack. The hero explains that when laying stones, you need to leave gaps between them. Although this seems unstable, he emphasizes that in fact, such laying makes the structure stronger if everything is done correctly. It clearly explains how to lay stones correctly with uniform gaps and overlapping seams. This method makes the wall more stable and reduces the risk of its destruction. Comparison of the two options clearly shows which method is more effective. The characters realize that simply stacking rocks is not enough to make the wall strong. The hero explains that strong attacks will require using pebbles to fill in the gaps, which will strengthen the structure and increase its stability. The young man explained that for a strong wall you need to place large stones on the outside and fill it with pebbles. This structure will help the wall keep its shape even in the rain, and water will not be a problem for it. Masaru explained that the proposed laying technique is a basic method, and over time they will be able to strengthen the wall even more. For now, they need to try to lay the stones without gaps so that the structure is stable. The main character assured that he would teach everyone the correct methods of building a strong wall, and would definitely help everyone in the construction process. He apologized to the villagers a little sheepishly, admitting that he was not a good teacher. He hoped they would understand him, and laughed awkwardly, trying to lighten the mood. Several girls with rabbit ears, apparently villagers, approached the protagonist. They say with enthusiasm and interest that they would like to know what other great ideas he has. Seeing their efforts, Masaru said that he would help them with food as well. The young man offered to make a stove for them after learning that they cooked over an open fire. The girls worriedly asked if it would be safe. The hero thought that the girls' request sounded more like an order, and realized that he shouldn't anger them. He was afraid of their determination and called them kitchen demons. He confidently announced that he was going to use the stones to build a stove, and assured them that there should be no problems with this. The girls were surprised by his determination. Masaru was reminded how difficult it was for them to cook, to which he only laughed awkwardly, realizing what he had gotten himself into. The girls, however, were immediately delighted to hear the promise to help and enthusiastically agreed. The main character said that he would do some hard work and start making a stove, but asked the girls to at least help him a little. Masaru said he needed some more materials besides the stone and asked if the girls could get them. They enthusiastically agreed to help, thanked him, and confirmed that it suited them. Masaru began to explain what they would be building from, listing them clearly: clay, grass, and sand. He explained that if you mix the grass and sand with the clay, the mixture will become much stronger after drying. The girls listened with interest as he explained that such a combination would strengthen the structure, since clay alone is too loose and weak. One of the girls admitted that she didn't know about using the clay mixture, and Masaru suggested that May take some people with him and get to work. He assured everyone that he would be happy to help if any questions arose. The girls began to talk animatedly about the need for tables, chairs, and cutlery for the entire village. Masaru thought about it, as such a task would require a lot of mana, but despite his doubts, he decided that he could handle it. The young man enthusiastically proposed building a covered area where the villagers could gather and eat together. He admitted that the work would take several days, but he was confident that he could do it. The girls with ears were amazed by his skills and admitted that he is an impressive person with amazing construction skills. They began to ask him about his past, wondering how he knew all this. Masaru was a little embarrassed and said that he learned everything on the job. When asked who he was, he replied that it was a regular job. He finally told who he was before, just an ordinary worker in a business center in the countryside. He did not embellish and admitted it with a smile. The young man approached the locals with a request for help in the construction. Everyone happily agreed to participate. Inspired by the support, Masaru declared that together they could do anything they wanted. The villagers set to work enthusiastically, carrying the heavy stones. Masaru led by example, keeping up with the others and personally helping with the stacking. He watched the process closely, giving advice and guiding others. The construction was in full swing, the frame of the future building was already standing, and everyone was doing their own thing. Masaru coordinated the process, indicating where the materials should be placed. The girls with ears enthusiastically carried the clay mixture, trying to keep up. After a long day of work, Masaru and the girls settled down to rest and enjoyed a meal by the fire. One of the moments caught everyone's attention when Masaru deftly used chopsticks, causing admiration from those watching. The next morning, work continued. Someone made furniture, someone carried boards. However, there were some mishaps. One of the log elements almost crushed Masaru. The villagers continued to work actively, moving beams and exchanging smiles. Meanwhile, the village chief watched silently from afar. His gaze was serious and penetrating. Masaru looked with delight at the tall wooden fence that he and the villagers had built. He proudly said that he had done it, and could not hide his joy. The others were also happy, loudly declaring that everything was done with their own hands. While Masaru was enjoying the moment, he was called to dinner, reminded that the work was finished and it was time to rest. The people with ears gathered under the roof they built with Masaru to share food and joy. The villagers happily thanked Masaru for everything he had done, from the stove to the covered area. He smiled and admitted that it was enough for him to see their happy faces, and realized that they were using the chopsticks he had made. At that moment, the chieftain approached them and greeted Masaru with a warm smile. He said that everything the village had now was possible thanks to him. Masaru modestly replied that he could not have managed without their support and participation. The village chief thanked Masaru on behalf of all the villagers with a warm smile. At this time, Mei happily ran up to him and hugged him. She exclaimed that his plan really worked. In the realm of the gods, two goddesses watched Masaru through a magical screen. One of them, with a slight smile, noted that the hero was doing just fine without their help. The second, Victinius, looked annoyed and insisted that her intervention was necessary. She reminded him that she had given Masaru 11 skills and could not just sit idly by. Her friend reproached her for being stubborn, to which Victinius indignantly declared that she was never wrong. One of the goddesses said with a cold smile that those who had acquired too many skills had no right to exist. The first goddess expressed doubt and tried to soften the conversation by mentioning that this had happened before. Another emphasized that usually newbies get 1 or 2 skills, and even then with difficulty. However, Victinius intervened, reminding them that the world had existed for over 400 years and had hardly changed. She was clearly irritated by the stagnant system and insisted on the need for change. One of the goddesses confidently declared that Masaru was necessary for this world. According to her, he was the one who could become the catalyst for its development. During dinner, one of the girls told Masaru that he was a great man and should realize it. He modestly noted that everything was achieved through a joint effort. The girls expressed their gratitude that the village was now even safer. Masaru enthusiastically shared new ideas for improvement, including strengthening the houses. But suddenly he remembered the important but awkward task of building a toilet and internally panicked, trying to postpone the conversation. The guy, deciding to use the possibilities of this world, asked an unexpected question. Are there any slimes nearby? The girls confirmed that such creatures do exist, but they live under a cliff and pose no threat. Masaru excitedly asked if they were talking about the same monsters, since slimes are famous for their danger. The young man was glad that the slimes would not be able to climb the cliff, because this meant the safety of the village. Masaru said he wanted to teach everyone about hygiene and create Saniva soil from clay, gravel, and sand. Although cement was unlikely to work, he remembered the TV show and decided to look for materials nearby, including the ocean. He asked an unexpected question, which caused an awkward silence at the table. He looked around in surprise, not understanding what was wrong. One of the girls finally answered that there really was an ocean. Mei sat down next to her and admitted that everyone in the village had once fled from that very place. Masaru looked at her in shock, unable to immediately understand what exactly had made them leave their homeland. Masaru was surprised, trying to comprehend what he had heard. He asked where the ocean was, and learned that it was about 10 days' journey to the southwest. One of the girls, unable to hold back her tears, said that they were driven out by ordinary people. The guy was shocked to realize how tense their relationship with humanity was. Everything fell into place, his suspicions were confirmed. Masaru learned that the villagers had been driven out by humans and were now afraid to return to the ocean. He apologized for bringing up the subject and promised to help, as he felt he owed them a favor. To realize his plans, he needs materials that can only be found near the coast. Realizing that the inhabitants are not ready to go there, he decides to go alone. Masaru, with a determined expression on his face, loudly announced that he would go to the ocean. The next morning, Masaru finds Mei at the entrance to the village and demands to know why she is so eager to come with him. He reminds her that she can barely stand up for herself and is blaming her mother for her responsibilities. Despite this, the girl stubbornly replies that she just wants to be near him. Mei did not give up and countered the accusations, claiming that Masaru had only defeated the goblins by luck. The chief tried to stop her and explained that she was not prepared for the dangers. Masaru again said that he did not need help. Despite this, he suddenly offered Masaru something to wear, asking for a favor. Masaru was surprised to receive the armor as a gift and found it very reliable. The chief asked him to tell the people of the village that the rabbits were now safe. He said goodbye, entrusting Halsan to the others, and asked not to expect gratitude. Masaru also decided to find out what exactly happened in the past. He, clad in armor, bid the villagers farewell cheerfully. He turned to Mei, asking her to stay home and behave calmly. The girl could hardly hold back her tears as she watched him leave. Masaru reached the ocean after 4 days of travel, overcoming many obstacles. He was impressed by the view and glad he had used the map. Along the way, he had encountered dangerous creatures and unexpected events, but now he stood at his goal, determined to accomplish his plan. The day before arriving at the ocean, the young man was attacked by bandits. They approached with a friendly look, but set up an ambush. One of them reached for his sword, preparing to attack. Masaru realized the danger, too late. The young man, without hesitation, dealt a strong blow with the mace to the enemy. His determination was reflected in his concentrated gaze. The situation escalated. Several enemies attacked him at once. Masaru easily dealt with the bandits using only a simple club. He noted that compared to the battle against the goblins, these opponents were weak. However, the goddess's words about evil people having no rights came back to him. He thought that using violence even against bandits might be wrong. He used healing magic to heal the bandits' wounds. Despite everything he had done, he couldn't just kill another person, even if he was an enemy. The young man calmly let the bandits go, not wanting to take their lives, but took their weapons, potions, and useful herbs. He considered it a fair exchange, because he received something that could be useful. Continuing on his way, he suddenly felt a strange signal. His face reflected surprise. It seemed that something important was approaching. Masaru reached the coastal town where Mei used to live. Before entering, he changed into the clothes of an ordinary adventurer so as not to arouse suspicion. From the top of the hill, he looked at the silent streets with surprise. The guard tower was empty, and there was not a soul in sight in the city. He froze in place when he saw that the city streets were occupied by goblins. The boy stopped in front of the goblins, noticing that he was in the very center of their lair. He smiled tensely, trying to hide the tension, and spoke politely, as if hoping for a diplomatic outcome. But from the looks on his enemies' faces, he realized that the chances for a peaceful conversation were zero. Masaru reacted to the goblin's cry, and the next moment the attack began. He stepped back, assessing the situation, realizing that there were too many enemies. Despite his confusion, he reminded himself that he had a sword now, and it was time to use it. The young man deftly dodged the goblin's attack and struck back with his sword. His movement was sharp and confident, despite the fact that his swordsmanship had not yet reached a high level. He noted to himself that this was enough for now. The boy struck blow after blow, thinking about his ability to handle a sword. He had no training in this skill, but perhaps his childhood kendo had given him a good foundation. Despite his success, he felt that kendo was ill-suited for real combat, as it was not designed for killing. Masaru looked at the remaining enemies with a smile, confident in his victory. He felt that nothing could stop him. However, suddenly, something huge and mysterious appeared in front of him, completely changing the course of the battle. A huge boar with a furious look suddenly jumped out from around the bend, with a terrifying goblin sitting on its back. The boy gritted his teeth and rushed into battle, dodging the devastating blows of the monstrous boar. One of the goblins, watching what was happening from the saddle, turned to his leader in bewilderment, waiting for an order. A goblin on a huge boar rushes into attack, driving the beast straight at Masaru. The guy barely manages to grab his sword and try to repel the onslaught, dodging the horns at the last moment. He faced the approaching enemy with determination, standing with his sword at the ready. The boar and the marauding goblin were rushing straight at him, the beast's eyes glowing with fury, and the rider was grinning ominously. At the last moment, Masaru threw himself to the side to avoid the powerful ram. He quickly assessed the situation, looking at the enemy riding on an enraged boar. He realized that his sword was too short for a direct attack. The only way out was to first neutralize the boar, otherwise he himself risked losing his hands. Masaru deftly raised his hand and took aim, realizing that the boar was not moving as fast as it seemed at first glance. He activated his inventory with determination and pulled out a huge log, throwing it with incredible force. He grinned predatorily as he watched the massive log knock down the boar and the stunned rider, blocking their path. Masaru thrust his sword into the ground with effort, his eyes blazing with tension. He cast a confident glance at the goblins, who, noticing the massive barrier that had suddenly appeared before them, froze for a moment in fear. Masaru gripped the hilt of his sword with predatory determination, preparing for the final blow. The goblins, unable to withstand his gaze, fled in panic. He rushed after them, realizing that they would run for reinforcements. Time was running out. The guy had just managed to catch his breath after the battle, when he was surrounded by soldiers in armor. One of them, menacingly mounted his horse, asked who he was. He quickly introduced himself, hoping to avoid new problems. But in front of him was the vice-captain of the army of the Kingdom of Gratus. The hero stopped abruptly as the knights of the Gratus Kingdom lined up in front of him. One of them shouted, demanding to be introduced. But before Masaru could respond, a polite rider stepped forward. He introduced himself as General Cook and apologized for the behavior of his subordinates, explaining that they had arrived on a mission to exterminate goblins. One of the knights noted with surprise that they had arrived too late. The enemies had already been defeated. Masaru confirmed that he had managed it alone and politely thanked them for saving him. He introduced himself and mentioned that he had come for materials. Hearing this, the knights began to whisper, amazed that he had dealt with the monsters alone. Masaru wondered if he could find out from them what had happened to the rabbit village. One of the knights noted that he had heard of the goblin rider and was surprised that he had been defeated. Another admitted outright that fighting such an opponent was rare and required strength. Another one admitted directly that fighting such an opponent was rare and required strength. This was followed by persistent questions to Masaru: where he was from, did he have skills, how old was he, and what did he do? His appearance raised suspicions that he was a local. The knight, impressed by Masaru's strength, offered him to join the knightly order. Masaru immediately remembered how heroes in manga are often offered such opportunities. However, he politely declined, explaining that he already had a goal and that he had come all this way for a reason. The officer praised Masaru for his willpower and said that he would be a great example for the soldiers. He asked where everyone had gone, and the knight suggested calling everyone. While they were discussing the area and calling a resident, Masaru politely asked for help in removing the bodies, which stunned his interlocutors. Masaru calmly explained that leaving the bodies behind could attract predators and monsters, so they needed to be burned and buried. The knight said that he would call others to collect the bodies. He wondered if knights would perform a task of this kind, and if they had such a low role outside the kingdom. The young man went to look for a place to bury the goblins' bodies. Masaru froze in shock when he heard the screams of the goddesses. They ran forward with frightened faces, not understanding what was happening, and demanded an explanation. The two goddesses in the magic room discussed the events that unfolded around Masaru. One of them, scrolling through her memories, noted that the goblin leader was a rider, and Masaru shouldn't have had a chance. They were surprised that a normal guy could win. After looking into his background, they learned that he had been a prize-winning kendo player since high school, making him an ideal candidate for the draft. The girls continue to analyze Masaru's situation. One of them finds out that his body was slightly different when he was summoned, and suggests that everything went wrong in this world from the start. She remains calm despite the seriousness of what is happening, while the second one begins to worry, because everything could end in disaster. Anxiety arises if you do not intervene. The consequences can be unpredictable, despite all the faith of the first goddess that it will influence the lives of people. The villagers thank the knights for their help and happily announce that they can now leave the village in peace. One of them points out with admiration that Masaru single-handedly destroyed all the goblins. The general and his squad also express their gratitude, and Masaru watches the whole thing with a restrained smile, standing aside. Masaru found himself in the spotlight after defeating the goblins. One of the knights offered to reward him. It turned out that the village did not have such a possibility. Despite this, Masaru assured that help was still possible. He calmly stated that he did not need money, but he would be glad to receive bottles and wooden boxes if they were available. He also mentioned that he needed seawater and shells. One of the knights was surprised and tried to understand why he needed all this, assuming that Masaru really came for some materials. In response, he explained that he needed all this to build a wall. The knight, remembering how Masaru saved the village, suggested that Garv not refuse such a request. One of the knights tried to explain that they themselves needed the bottles to collect water from the ocean, and that giving away even a little would create problems. Leader of them thought about it, agreeing with the need for the boxes but expressing doubts about the bottles. He internally decided to teach Masaru a lesson. However, Masaru suddenly reminded him that it was not necessary for him to go to the ocean for water, which stumped the chief. Masaru reminded them with a sly smile that the village had a well next to the garden that he had noticed along the way. The head knight was stunned that Masaru knew about this and asked in a panic how he knew. Masaru calmly explained that he simply saw him while passing by. One of the knights was indignant that none of the villagers had mentioned the existence of a well, despite complaints about the lack of water and vegetation. Meanwhile, Masaru noted with satisfaction that everything was going according to plan. The angry villagers surrounded Masaru, accusing him of revealing the information about the well to the knights. One of them grabbed him by the collar, accusing him of treason and threatening what he would do if the village was destroyed. Masaru countered the accusations by reminding them that this man was the one who told the knights everything, and he said that the questions should be directed to the head of the knights. The enraged villager rushed at Masaru with a shovel, screaming. However, Masaru quickly reacted and dodged the blow. After the attempted attack, the knight standing next to Masaru asked the villagers what they intended to do next. He reminded that hiding resources and attacking an innocent person in their kingdom usually resulted in death or turning the guilty into slaves. Hearing this, the village chief and the villagers were horrified. The villagers, in a panic, begged not to be subjected to harsh punishment. The knights were about to make a decision when Masaru intervened with a slight smile, hinting that he had an alternative. He said he was prepared to offer a condition that, if the villagers agreed, could result in a different outcome. With a slight smile, Masaru announced that he was willing to forget everything that had happened on one condition. His unexpected statement caused amazement among those around him, including the knights. One of them confirmed that if the victim did not insist on punishment, the accused could be forgiven. Masaru then clarified that the villagers' freedom would depend on their answers to a few questions. Under the gaze of everyone present, he suggested they begin, hinting at something more than just an interrogation. When one of the knights asked about the village's past, the villagers became nervous. His question caused panic and indignation. Garv tried to stop the conversation. The others looked at each other in surprise, not understanding where this was all going. Masaru, however, calmly watched, obviously knowing more than the others. When Masaru began asking about the events of 2 years ago, one of the knights, Eldam, intervened. Clearly concerned about the direction of the conversation, he asked why Masaru was interested in the past. In response, Masaru firmly stated that he would not answer until he himself received the answers, because this concerned people dear to him. Eldam, hanging his head, said that the village really did belong to the rabbits, and everyone present knew about it firsthand. Masaru listened carefully and, acknowledging Eldam's strength, remarked that even he could lose to him. They began a conversation. Eldam began his story by saying that it all started 5 years ago, when the previous king began to seize nearby territories, expanding the state. One of these areas was a village owned by rabbits. Garv and Eldam fought against its inhabitants and won. After this, they took over the lands for themselves, and Harv became the head of the village, while the rabbits were forced to flee. After listening to the story, Masaru bitterly realized that everything that was happening was not the work of monsters, but the work of people themselves. He was shocked by how the people drove out the rabbits, and those who did not manage to escape were captured and turned into slaves. Masaru recalled how the rabbits, despite the years that had passed, still kept in their memories those who had failed to escape on that fateful day. Eldam objected. Masaru turned sharply to him, not holding back his emotions. The young man, filled with rage, demanded the immediate release of all the rabbits, raising his voice to a scream. The knight tried to calm him down, explaining that it was impossible to free them right now. Masaru, however, was not going to back down. He suggested that if he defeated everyone here and now, then those who were holding the rabbits would take their place. Masaru, filled with righteous anger, lashed out at the villagers, reproaching them for turning innocent rabbits into slaves. He furiously demanded an explanation. Does following the law really give the right to commit any lawlessness? One of the knights tried to justify himself by saying that he was unable to change anything, because the law does not allow it. He shouted out, not to be taken for a fool without holding back his rage. He accused his opponents of hypocrisy and cruelty, declaring that such bloodthirsty scoundrels had no right to speak of justice. After Masaru's heated speech, there was silence. He demurely apologized for raising his voice and asked everyone to think about his words. After stressing that he would give them some time to think, he turned around and left, rubbing the back of his head with a tired expression on his face. Victoria suddenly appeared before Masaru and angrily hit him, accusing him of stupidity. He was stunned by her sudden appearance and abruptness. The goddess sternly reminded him that she had sent him for a specific purpose, to save the Mura, and not to make a demonstration. Masaru tried to take the girl away, but she did not hold back her emotions and accused him of hatred and aggression, of trying to destroy the country. He tried to justify himself, saying that he did not decide to come here himself, and that she was exaggerating. Maybe he did not even meet the love of his life because of her. The goddess looked very tired, but was frightened by Masaru's question about whether he could control an entire army. Under the starry sky, the girl told Masaru with cold confidence that he could defeat an entire army on his own. His dumbfounded face betrayed his complete incomprehension of what was happening. She explained that at the moment of his reincarnation, they had to modify his body, giving him strength comparable to a spirit-class mage. There was guilt in her voice. They had clearly overdone it, without thinking about the consequences. Masaru scratched his head in confusion after hearing about a spirit class that he had never even heard of before. The girl tried to explain that now he was on the same level as magical creatures. He can run without getting tired, he can easily control magic. All this seemed incredible to him, but she looked at him as if he were irrefutable proof of their experiment. Masaru was stunned to realize that he had already experienced unusual abilities that he had never even suspected. He realized that his recovery and physical characteristics were beyond normal limits, although he was still at a low level of development. Trying to take control of the situation, he admitted that everything was much more complicated than it seemed. Looking seriously at the girl, he accused her of changing his life, without asking his opinion. Realizing her guilt, she apologized to him with pain in her voice. The girl looked away silently, her face frozen in an expression of sadness and determination. Masaru called out to her in alarm, noticing something was wrong, but before he could understand anything, a bright light flashed in front of him. He looked at her silhouette in confusion, not understanding what was happening or where she was disappearing to. The next morning, Masaru looked calm and collected, as if the events of the previous day had not left a mark on him. He was called out to, and a captain with a group of soldiers approached him. Judging by their faces, Masaru's decision to free someone was unexpected. The captain asked in surprise whether he really meant everyone, and reminded them that the residents would hardly agree to this so quickly. Masaru cheerfully suggested postponing the expedition to the big cities and inquired about the situation in other villages. The knight spoke about the notes and whether he could meet them. He seemed confident, but the captain noticed that he was unusually relaxed. When he asked directly if something had happened during the night, Masaru became embarrassed. He tried to hide his excitement by citing successful negotiations, but his expression betrayed that something important and personal had happened the previous night. Masaru's laughter broke the tension, and he admitted with relief that he had expected the negotiations to end much worse. The soldiers were making fun of him, and he was pleading with them to stop. The captain reminded them of the purpose of their meeting, to avoid conflict, and suggested going to the city. Masaru agreed, and their path lay to the City of Knights. After a few hours of travel, Masaru looked with admiration at the powerful walls of the city that was the base of the coastal knights of the Greta Kingdom. The carriage entered the city of Paterium, majestic and lively. It immediately made a strong impression on Masaru. The captain proudly explained that this was a city of knights. Masaru smiled, trying to share their delight, but deep down he was tormented by conflicting feelings. Once inside the city, Masaru noted with displeasure the lack of basic hygiene, reminding himself of a fishing village. However, instead of being annoyed, he decided to use this fact as a trump card, a reason to free the beastmen. His gaze became calculating. He was going to turn the problem to his advantage. Meanwhile, the captain reminded them to show their guild card, as Masaru was heading straight to the leader. Masaru froze in horror when he realized that he had forgotten the most important thing: he didn't have a guild card. His face turned pale, and the captain desperately tried not to believe what he had heard. Confusion reigned in the guild. The employees could not believe that he was not registered. He reminded that even children receive a card from the age of 12. The guild member politely thanked Masaru for waiting and offered to place his hand on the magical device. When his hand touched the device, it lit up and began to automatically create a map, causing admiration from those around him. The girl warned about the strictness of the law regarding fraud, adding that the technology of creating the cards itself was passed down from the gods. The guild employee explained that while the name, guild, and abilities would be visible to everyone, personal information could be hidden and would remain inaccessible as long as the card owner was alive. Masaru was a little surprised, but the thought of data security reassured him. He happily accepted the brand new guild card, feeling like he was part of something bigger. Meanwhile, his companions ran up to him with curiosity and started to urge him, "Come on, show it to us." Masaru began to understand it and thought about how to use it. Masaru looked at the map calmly and noticed that he had leveled up, without giving it much thought. However, his comrades were in complete shock, their expressions betraying complete bewilderment. When he showed the status, the amount of skills caused a loud cry of, "What the hell?" One of the soldiers couldn't believe that this was even possible. The guy tried to hide the window with an innocent smile. He tried to smooth things over by pretending that nothing unusual had happened. But it was too late. Everyone had seen everything. Seeing Masaru's number of skills and titles, the knights were completely stunned. They had never seen such a level before. One of them whispered that it was 3 times his own status. Masaru panicked and tried to cover up the situation, begging everyone to forget what he had seen and insisting that he was neither a spy nor a murderer. He pleaded with desperation in his voice, "Let's just forget about this." Meanwhile, the knights were seriously afraid that they would be accused of slander and decided to urgently call a meeting to discuss how to reflect all this in the reports. A man with a stern expression and an imperious bearing appeared at the meeting. He looked at the guests carefully and spoke calmly. Introducing himself as Lancelot, the mayor of the city, he made it clear that the meeting with him would not be a mere formality. The young man was surprised to see how different Lancelot was from the other knights. His aura inspired respect and caution. He had just begun his speech of thanks when the mayor of the city got straight to the point. Without further ado, Lancelot stated that he knew the true purpose of the visit: negotiations for the liberation of the beastmen. Lancelot bluntly stated that Masaru had come for the purpose of exchange and immediately noted that he did not see anything valuable on him. His calmness and insight made Masaru tense up. It became clear that persuading this man would not be easy. Bracing himself for a tense negotiation, Masaru decided to take a direct approach. He firmly stated that he was ready to offer a deal that would be the largest in the city's history. Everything depended on how convincing his proposal was. To everyone's surprise, Masaru calmly and confidently voiced his proposal, his knowledge. He stated that with their help, he could reduce mortality, solve food problems, create jobs, and raise the standard of living in the city. Lancelot was initially taken aback by such a bet, but Masaru continued with confidence, emphasizing that his knowledge was a real force capable of transforming society. To illustrate the value of his knowledge, Masaru gave a simple but effective example: improving carts. He explained that all the local carts shook because they had no springs. He then described in detail the mechanism that could absorb shocks and vibrations, showing a diagram with flat springs. This interested everyone present. Masaru confidently declared that he could make travel much more comfortable and safer for both people and horses. Lancelot admitted that Masaru's proposal sounded very convincing and could potentially lead to fantastic results. He expressed support for the idea, but also noted that he could not yet fully trust Masaru's words without concrete evidence. As a result, Lancelot asked him to stay in the city until the final decision was made, because such issues are not decided immediately, especially in large settlements. Lancelot confirmed that Masaru had refused Cook's offer to join the knights, but he also stressed that he did not want to lose such a strong fighter. He set a condition: if there was no progress in the near future, Masaru would stay here for a long time. In return, he promised to keep the beastmen under protection, but warned that Masaru was putting not only his knowledge at stake, but also his own fate. Lancelot accepted Masaru's offer, saying, "It's a deal." He promised to hand over the beastmen to Masaru once he saw the first results. In response, Masaru said he would start by improving local hygiene and modernizing horse-drawn carriages. After making the deal, Lancelot acknowledged the benefit of Masaru's offer. He would get rid of the potentially dangerous beastmen, avoiding a riot, and would gain some benefit in the process. Masaru noted that the leader of the knights turned out to be not such a bad person as he seemed at first. Lancelot said that he would begin preparations to free the beastmen, but was concerned about the opinions of the townspeople. The young man suggested settling the dispute with a duel, since this was a city of knights. He said that victory would determine who was right. His idea aroused surprise and interest among everyone. Lancelot enthusiastically accepted the idea of a duel, considering it an excellent show that would convince even the doubters. He added that if Masaru's opponent was the strongest knight, then victory would be indisputable. Masaru realized that he was in for a serious test. He anxiously asked who exactly he was going to defeat. Lancelot suddenly challenged Masaru to a duel, sharply pointing his sword at him. Masaru looked at him in shock, not believing what was happening. Lancelot suddenly pointed his sword at Masaru again and offered to fight right now. Masaru tried to refuse, citing the consequences of the city leader's defeat. But, noticing the burning passion in Lancelot's eyes, he realized that he was obsessed with duels. Masaru enthusiastically began an impromptu lesson on cleanliness, trying to convey the importance of hygiene to everyone. The whole room became animated, and the knights began to take sanitary rules with unexpected seriousness. He promised personal lectures to those who tried to escape, which caused a slight panic among everyone. Even Lancelot did not escape participation, becoming an example for his subordinates. The young man continued his lecture, seriously explaining the consequences of poor hygiene. He explained how parasites in dirty water caused diseases and gave examples from experience. Everyone listened to him with unexpected attention, even taking notes. At the end, he reminded about the obligatory heat treatment of meat and boiling of water. Masaru briefly explained to the knights the basics of Japanese school education and the principles of hygiene. From the expressions on their faces, he could tell that this was indeed a high level of education for them. Lancelot admired how easily Masaru gave such a lecture. Masaru himself admitted that he is not an expert in medicine, but even basic knowledge can save lives and prevent epidemics. After the lecture on hygiene, Lancelot was amazed by Masaru's knowledge, because even in the capital, research into the plague had barely progressed. He said that every piece of information about this is very important. He admitted that he could not adequately reward Masaru for such valuable information. Instead, he offered help or support in any form. Masaru was embarrassed, realizing that he did not do this for profit. Lancelot admitted that he could not remain in debt, given the scope of their activities. Masaru noted to himself how collected and determined he was. Deciding not to put it off, he ended the meeting and easily asked for the forge. Lancelot reacted with surprise to this unexpected request. Masaru said that he had a lot of work to do to improve the carts. Lancelot readily agreed and promised to provide him with the forge in full in the morning. He explained that the city lacked skilled craftsmen, the best ones left for larger settlements. Masaru and his companions entered the old forge, where there was chaos and tools scattered everywhere. He stared at the room in horror, clearly not expecting such a state. One of the knights laughed at his reaction, and added that there were more than enough materials here. The guy was furious at the mess he saw, and insisted that the foreman couldn't work in such a mess. He loudly demanded that a full inventory be taken, and that everyone be gathered to immediately restore order. The seriousness of his intentions stunned the others, and they rushed to carry out his orders. Masaru gave clear instructions. Anything broken or of poor quality was to be marked, and the premises were to be thoroughly cleaned. One of the knights asked in bewilderment why they needed to keep track of the materials at all, since they were an army after all. Masaru could hardly contain his irritation as he looked at the chaos in the workshop, and pointed out sharply that it was simply impossible to find anything in this dusty pile. He recalled his past at the home center, where such negligence would have been unacceptable. There, any incorrectly placed item would immediately catch the eye, as thousands of items were checked with precision and order. Masaru, taking command, ordered Lancelot to take care of the interior of the warehouse and strictly demanded that all his instructions be followed without question. His eyes were shining with enthusiasm, and he promised to show everyone what truly perfect storage organization was. The young man organized the sorting process, watching the knights carry boxes of materials. He carefully checked everything against the list, indicating what and where to put. Some items raised questions, such as old tools or boxes in which animals had taken up residence. Masaru looked around the renovated forge with satisfaction. Everything looked clean, orderly, and neat. He noted that it was much better, and the stock of materials was surprisingly large. Masaru noted with relief how the workspace had been transformed. Everything became neat and clean. However, despite the order, Masaru began to realize the scale of the task. There was too much stock, and among it were materials that he had no idea how to handle. As Masaru continued to work without sleep, one of the men explained that the oversupply of ore had become a chronic problem for them. He clarified that this is the result of a long-term agreement with the city, which is still in effect and will be active for at least a year. Masaru thought, if you mix the materials correctly in the right proportions, you can get alloys suitable for work. He decided to smelt the ore into convenient ingots to make it easier to use. The man was surprised to be asked what an alloy was. Masaru decided to explain what an alloy is with a simple example. He explained that when copper and tin are mixed, bronze is a metal that is harder than copper but more brittle than tin. He showed that bronze is used to create everyday objects, such as knives, sickles, razors, and even bells. Masaru then thought out loud that he wanted to make stainless steel, which required iron and chromium. His explanation left his audience confused, and he tried to simplify his speech, wondering how he could explain it more clearly. The young man continued his explanation, this time using steel as an example. He showed that by mixing iron with carbon, a new metal with improved properties can be produced, steel. It is stronger than iron, and suitable for many purposes, although it loses its fusibility. One of the listeners realized that without knowledge, technology is meaningless, because any unsuccessful attempts are simply a waste of material. While the others were pondering what had been said, Masaru confidently headed towards his workplace, deciding that it was time to test his skills in action, in a real blacksmith's craft. Masaru studied the interface of the blacksmithing skill in surprise, realizing that he could now create swords simply from a pattern. He wondered if this was too cheating, since the skill allowed him to edit objects even during processing and work with metals without preparing them first. Assuming that he had received such skills through special coupons, Masaru decided to test how accurately the system reproduced what he wanted. Sighing, he set to work, starting the mechanism. Masaru excitedly activated the skill, and 2 iron ingots appeared on the table in front of him. One of them was high quality, with better properties than normal iron. Inspired, he declared that he would now be able to create anything that required the highest level of craftsmanship. After several hours of work, Masaru stopped to assess the result. He carefully picked up the newly created knife and examined it carefully. Then, without rushing, he began to separate all the elements of the handle fastening, thinking about the details of the design. Sitting at the forge, Masaru looked at the anvil with interest, thinking about his capabilities. He realized that thanks to his new skill, he could create tools himself. Unable to restrain himself, he finally decided to try what he had long dreamed of, using a blacksmith's hammer himself. Masaru set to work enthusiastically, heating the metal in a fire and hammering it into shape. He recalled his school lessons, where similar methods were used to create farm tools. Once he had finished forging, he quickly transferred the piece to water to harden it and increase its strength. Masaru proudly showed off the sword he had created, shining in his hands. One of the knights reacted with admiration, amazed that he had forged the weapon himself. Lancelot admitted that he had come to sharpen the sword after completing the inventory, but he clearly had not expected to see this. Masaru, in turn, was surprised by how long Lancelot had been watching him in the forge. Lancelot, amazed by Masaru's talent, asked if he had really forged the sword himself. Masaru modestly confirmed this and added that he would like to try improving existing weapons. Lancelot immediately offered him his sword, which he hadn't been able to sharpen properly lately. Masaru agreed to think about how to do this. At the same time, Lancelot noticed something on the table that made him uneasy. Masaru confirmed with a smile that he was indeed planning to present his project, and invited Lancelot to bring anyone who wanted to come for a consultation. He said goodbye to him and returned to his work. Lancelot, as he left, watched him with a little anxiety and admiration. The young man noticed that Masaru's eyes were burning with the same passion that he himself had in battle. Despite the warning not to overdo it, he knew that Masaru had found his calling. Late that night, Masaru sat in the forge, surrounded by tools and buckets of water. He looked tired, but also amazed, as if he had just realized how much he had accomplished. The young man, looking at the completed work, realized that he had overdone it a little. He was genuinely happy that he could create things that brought joy to people. The boy, tired but focused, was planning the next day. He wanted to show the townspeople how to use the things he had made and even give a lecture on hygiene. Despite his fatigue, he was wondering if he should create a few more items. The next morning, Masaru had difficulty waking up after a sleepless night until someone insistently woke him up. The girl stood in front of him with a serious expression on her face, shaking his hand firmly. He looked at her in surprise and politely asked who she was. The girl with a serious face announced a forced measure, scheduling a duel with Lancelot. While she explained that all the knights were busy, he silently comprehended the news. Hearing that the fight would take place in 3 days, Masaru only sighed, realizing what he had gotten himself into. The messenger finished her speech, officially confirming Masaru's duel with Lancelot. Masaru tried to hide his panic, realizing that everything had been decided without his knowledge. The girl realized with surprise that the initiator was indeed Lancelot himself. Despite the tension, Masaru tried his best to remain calm, pretending that everything was under control. The guy quickly assured her that everything would go without injuries, trying to keep a confident face. He promised to be careful, but the girl still looked worried. She asked if he was afraid of losing. But when the conversation turned to Lancelot, Masaru seemed to brighten up, offering to stage a small demonstration. His unexpected enthusiasm left his interlocutor puzzled, because she had not expected such determination from him. Lancelot arrived at the training ground, surprised by Masaru's absence. One of the knights pointed towards the well, saying that he was installing something inside. Masaru, meanwhile, continued his preparations without losing confidence and calm, as if everything was going according to a pre-planned plan. Masaru stood up in front of the crowd and solemnly announced the demonstration of his invention. He promised to show how easy and effective it was now to extract water from a well. Curious glances began to appear in the crowd, and Masaru himself invited volunteers to help him, confidently taking the situation into his own hands. One of the residents hesitantly asked if she could handle the controls, and Masaru reassured her, saying that the mechanism was so simple that even children could use it. He began to explain the operation of the device step by step. First, you need to pour water into a special hole, then use a lever to create a vacuum, after which the pump begins to lift the water up. The demonstration was going well, generating more and more interest among those gathered. When a powerful stream of water gushed noisily from the well, the assembled people gasped in surprise. The woman standing nearby did not hide her delight, and Masaru proudly presented the device a simple and effective pump. He explained that such pumps will soon appear in all city wells so that everyone can easily use them. Masaru presented a new improvement, a modernized cart. One of the knights watched the process with interest, and Masaru himself seemed to be fully focused on the demonstration. Under his guidance, the old cart was indeed transformed into something much more functional. Masaru, lying under the cart, carefully studied its design. He explained that he planned to separate the axle with wheels from the body and connect them through a special frame. He was going to install springs to soften the shaking when moving. Admitting that he was not yet sure of the accuracy of the implementation, he nevertheless confidently declared that he would create the basis for a new, more comfortable carriage. The knight standing nearby listened with interest, not fully understanding where all this would lead. Masaru enthusiastically explained his idea, drawing a diagram of the future design, and the knight listened with distrust but attention. The work was already in full swing. Several assistants were preparing wooden parts, while Masaru personally supervised the assembly process. Masaru looked with satisfaction at the completed prototype of the new carriage. He declared that the first version was ready and was looking forward to testing it. One of the knights suggested trying it out right away, but Masaru, exhausted from work, could barely stand on his feet. During the test, the cart, with the new shock absorbers, showed itself from the best side. The ride was surprisingly soft. The knight was amazed to note that Even without the cushions, there was almost no shaking. He was amazed at how comfortable the ride had become thanks to Masaru's invention. The hero enthusiastically explained the differences between suspension types, showing simple diagrams: axial, independent, and more complex options. He noted that local carts had no suspension at all, so even installing basic shock absorbers significantly improved comfort. Despite the fact that today work was only done on the chassis, he assured that the design is capable of supporting the weight of 9 to 10 people. When asked about the possibility of increasing the body, he confidently answered, "Of course." The young man enthusiastically explained that the new system could be implemented everywhere, and in the future it could be improved. Lancelot was delighted. Now military expeditions would be much more convenient. Inspired by the success, those around him vied with each other to offer themselves as the next test subjects. Masaru barely had time to direct and calm everyone down, and the commander only sighed heavily in response, watching this stormy excitement. During a leisurely stroll, Lancelot acknowledged that Masaru's inventions would make everyday life much more convenient. Masaru responded by saying that he had already prepared additional devices and would hand them over to the craftsmen for further development and large-scale implementation. The conversation also touched on the terms of cooperation. Masaru insisted on an equal exchange. The commander, impressed by the results, admitted that their proposals were insufficient and finally asked the main question: what did he want in return? Masaru calmly voiced his demand. He wanted a non-aggression pact between humans and beastmen, as well as the transfer of excess ore. With disbelief and slight shock, he asked again if this was all Masaru really wanted. Lancelot, slightly surprised but without hesitation, agreed to Masaru's terms, making a deal with him. Masaru smiled with relief, realizing that the beastmen would now be able to live in peace after their liberation. He called it a mutually beneficial deal, since exchanging technology for peace seemed fair to him. Lancelot, in turn, gave his word only for his city, emphasizing that he could not answer for the entire country, and warned Masaru to be careful. The boy thanked Lancelot, who smiled slightly and silently accepted his gratitude. However, the very next second, the commander, with a cheerful laugh, reminded Masaru of the upcoming duel in 3 days, urging him not to relax. He watched with relief as Lancelot left, knowing that despite his sternness, he was a man of his word. Thanks to their agreement, the threat of attack had been avoided, and Masaru was truly grateful for that. Tired, he reflected on the need for a good night's sleep to restore his strength. However, as soon as he relaxed a little, people appeared on the horizon again, each with urgent business for Masaru, not giving him a moment of peace. Completely exhausted, Masaru collapsed onto the bed and admitted with emotion he had no more strength. Hugging a pillow, he complained about the futility of learning mechanics from scratch, and how hard it was to be a mentor. At the same time, he smiled as he remembered the masters who patiently taught him himself. Now he understood how difficult it was. The boy looked at the night sky alone, feeling the weight of loss. He knew that he would never see those he had left behind again, although he saw the same sky and the same moon. In his heart, there was a sincere desire not just to forget, but to meet again, so as not to bury his feelings inside. Masaru turned around in confusion as he heard a gentle voice coming from the rooftop. There, in the moonlight, stood Vatinius, humming a melody that touched him deeply. The young man smiled awkwardly, trying to explain why this poem had suddenly come to mind. He admitted that he remembered it from a collection he had read a long time ago. Vatinius sat down next to him on the roof and quietly asked what the woman from his past was like. The guy thoughtfully looked towards the horizon, remembering his first love. He said that he did not immediately understand his feelings and confessed too late. The goddess listened silently as he spoke of how she had reciprocated his feelings but had ended up leaving for another. Masaru suddenly remembered a girl named May, with whom he had past feelings. He explained that the beast girl's name brought back those memories, although it was just a coincidence. Vatinius sadly asked for forgiveness, and Masaru wondered if their conversation had affected her mood. Masaru sat next to Vatinius under the night sky, and with a sincere smile, told her that he wanted to do everything possible for the crows he had grown to love. He admitted that this was what gave meaning to his life. The girl turned away softly, hiding her embarrassment, but still thanked Masaru despite her pride. The goddess looked at him in surprise, asking what was wrong. He looked away in embarrassment, muttering that it was nothing special. He just thought she really was a goddess. Although she had seemed worthless before, Victinius agreed with a soft smile, as if forgiving Masaru for his clumsiness. He chuckled in relief, preparing for the next task. Realizing that he was already awake anyway, Masaru decided to return to the forge and get to work, while Victinius stayed behind to take a walk in the moonlight. 3 days had passed since Victinius had appeared, and he had been busy all that time. He shared his knowledge with warriors, explained the structure of mechanisms, and advised artisans. Masaru burst into the room and, in surprise, demanded an explanation from Lancelot. He calmly stretched out, complaining that he was greeted with the same phrases everywhere. Masaru explained that the soldiers had arranged this gathering to see how his new sword would perform in battle. Lancelot was amazed. He did not expect that everything would turn into a whole performance, and began to ask where his blade was. The boy jokingly reproached Lancelot for wanting to give his weapon to his opponent before the duel. Lancelot flared up in response, because the sword he took to replace the broken one turned out not to be a training one at all. Masaru was surprised to note that the sword was very durable, and visually resembled the one he had previously passed on. The young man confidently pulled out his sword and stood in a fighting stance, preparing for a duel. Lancelot smiled enthusiastically, anticipating the fight and already imagining how he would show off his new weapon after victory. Masaru, grinning, replied that he was not afraid of losing, but added that Lancelot would be in trouble if he got injured. Lancelot recalled past battles with enthusiasm, emphasizing that he had never lost to younger opponents. The young man asked with slight irony about his defeats, but Lancelot confidently answered that there were none at all. The conversation smoothly turned into light teasing, and Masaru, realizing that everything was arranged specifically for the sake of a duel, felt that his secret plan had already been revealed. Lancelot smirked and asked Masaru to show his full power. Masaru nodded confidently in response. They entered the arena together, ready to fight. For Masaru, this was not just training, but a way to express his gratitude to his comrade. The boy noticed the girl who was delivering the knight's message in the stands. The judge enthusiastically announced the start of the duel between Masaru and the knight commander Lancelot. The spectators in the stands held their breath, and the participants, standing facing each other, listened attentively to the conditions of the fight, without dirty tricks, until complete admission of defeat. As soon as the judge gave the command, Masaru's face was distorted with tension. He gathered all his will into a fist. Instantly drawing his sword, the fight began. While one of the knights was furiously rushing into the attack, the spectators watched the events with bated breath. The girl in the box shared her impressions. Despite Masaru's confidence, it seemed to her that he did not consider himself a real fighter. Masaru and Lancelot engaged in a tense duel in front of the spectators. While the commentators discussed the outcome of the battle, Masaru was surprised that his opponent was not so simple. He chose close combat, hoping to quickly feel the strength of his opponent, but Lancelot confidently stated that few could compare with him in power. The fight quickly turned into a furious, close combat. Masaru had a hard time parrying powerful blows from Lancelot, who acted confidently and aggressively. One of his attacking lunges broke through Masaru's defense, forcing him to fly back under the onslaught of his opponent's strength. Masaru barely dodged the crushing blow that left a deep crack in the ground. He barely managed to stay on his feet, shocked by the force of the attack. However, instead of fear, a mixture of confusion and sarcasm appeared on his face. He tried to comprehend the situation and think of a new move. Lancelot assessed his opponent with restraint, noticing Masaru's strength and confident stance. However, despite this admission, he abruptly went on the attack, showing that he was not going to give in even for a moment. The guy could hardly contain the onslaught, feeling his body failing from fatigue. Lancelot, on the other hand, increased his pressure, demanding more and easily read Masaru's every move. He realized that his training was not enough to deal with such an opponent. Masaru watched his opponent's movements with great intensity, knowing that sheer force would not lead to victory. He remembered Victinius's words about his ability to stand up to an army on his own, but that seemed out of reach now. He prepared to act, relying on everything he had. A strategy quickly formed in my head. Use dexterity, improvisation, and the skills acquired during my time living in the village. Masaru used an unexpected technique. Wooden logs suddenly materialized in front of his opponent. His opponent looked at what was happening in bewilderment, not expecting such an unconventional skill to appear. Lancelot watched in confusion as the arena became covered in randomly scattered logs. He couldn't figure out what Masaru was planning and wondered if he was planning to build a bridge or a trap. Meanwhile, Masaru had already begun activating a whole series of skills, including woodworking and blacksmithing, as if preparing to begin real construction right in the middle of battle. He activated a series of skills, and siege weapons began to appear right in the arena. The guy confidently explained that thanks to the level of skills and magic, you can create complex structures instantly. The main thing is to have imagination. Lancelot, disappointed by Masaru's resistance, loudly expressed his displeasure. However, the girl who was watching the fight realized that Masaru was once again using the scattered materials to create something new. A surprised Lancelot was just beginning to realize that he was caught up in a carefully thought-out plan when the girl called out to him right in the middle of the fight. Masaru, with a confident smile, activated a giant ballista, assembled from the same materials that were scattered around the arena. Lancelot, noticing the device, was amazed. He realized that this was part of a prearranged plan. Lancelot gritted his teeth, mentally analyzing the situation. He realized that after adopting a fighting stance, his mobility was limited. The knight struggled to his feet after the unexpected attack. The crowd watched in suspense, and Masaru, wasting no time, prepared to deliver the finishing blow. Lancelot's eyes widened in horror as he saw something unexpected in front of him. His lips twitched in shock as the massive structure crashed into the arena. He couldn't believe what he saw. The crowd burst into applause as the outcome of the battle became clear. Masaru stood leaning on his sword while his opponent, having fallen to the ground, only weakly raised his hand in defeat. As the crowd continued to applaud, Masaru stood with a slight smile, watching the reaction of his defeated opponent. The latter, still sitting in the arena, realized that all this time Masaru had been methodically moving towards one goal: to break his sword. Masaru calmly explained that he had suspected a weakness in his opponent's sword from the very beginning. He tested this before the fight, when he was lent a weapon. Using his knowledge of materials, Masaru prepared a strategy in advance that allowed him to cut the blade straight in half. The enemy, finally realizing the true purpose of the giant bow, was stunned by the thoughtfulness of the plan. The hero calmly explained that the giant weapon, known as a ballista, was not intended to attack but rather as a distraction. All he needed was to take a favorable position and cut the enemy's blade. He admitted that he could not match his swordsmanship, but he won due to the quality of the weapon that he himself created. The opponent admitted defeat, realizing that he lost not by force, but by cunning. Masaru, with a slight smile, thanked him for the opportunity to fight and handed his opponent his sword. The latter froze in surprise at first, and then took the weapon with respect, acknowledging his opponent's strength. The warrior laughed loudly, demonstratively waving his sword in front of the jubilant crowd. He acknowledged his impulsiveness and explained that he had always been a fighter who valued the passion for battle over cold calculation. The warrior recalled his past battles, when he was filled with a feeling of unity with his comrades and the joy of becoming stronger. He realized that now there was no one left around him who would be with him. In the arena, surrounded by many spectators, the two fighters exchanged glances and thoughts about the meaning of strength in battles. One of them admitted with slight sadness that the stronger he became, the more boring his life became. However, meeting a new opponent unexpectedly awakened a long-forgotten feeling of joy in him. He smiled for the first time in a long time, admitting that today's fight was special for him. One admitted that fighting was not his path, but did not deny the pleasure of watching the other's strength. The other, with a hint of mockery, promised to expect a more worthy challenge next time. In the arena, amidst the attention of the crowd, the name of the winner was officially announced. The promise made earlier finally fulfilled. The crowd cheered as the solemn proclamation was made from the balcony, changing the fate of many. The warriors in the arena raised their hands in victory and joy, for now their struggle had borne fruit, and the enslaved people were finally free. The knights discussed Masaru's skills and talent while sitting in the tavern. One of them was surprised to note how varied and useful Masaru's skills were, while the others were mocking him in a friendly manner, but they did not notice the man who had come up behind them. The leisurely evening in the tavern was abruptly interrupted when a familiar knight confidently entered the room. His appearance caused panic among those present, But he immediately made it clear that he was not going to scold anyone. He just wanted answers, especially about Masaru, whose skills were very different from the usual. His questions sounded like orders. The knight studied the document carefully, not hiding his surprise at what he read. Masaru had an impressive number of skills, which contrasted sharply with his low level, uncharacteristic even for ordinary warriors. This discrepancy did not escape his notice, and now he was beginning to understand why information about Masaru had been so carefully hidden. Even experienced fighters would feel threatened if they knew the truth. The commander realized with regret that his connection with Masaru was coming to an end, despite having managed to achieve a second victory for him. He admitted that it would have been more interesting to watch this warrior as a free man. While he was thinking about this, a girl suddenly intervened in the conversation. She made an unambiguous proposal, as if she was the one who had been waiting for the right moment all this time. A few days later, Masaru headed towards the building where important meetings used to be held. He was already ready to leave, but he was detained. The commander wanted to personally make sure that everything was okay with him. The improvements were noticeable, and the liberation of the beastmen was proceeding according to plan, albeit with a delay. Masaru realized that he still had some task to complete before leaving. The guy was surprised to notice the marks of beatings on Lancelot's face and couldn't help but ask a question. The commander, crossing his arms, tried to maintain his dignity, but evasively admitted that he had encountered an enemy to whom he could do nothing. The exchange of phrases soon became mocking, especially when it turned out that the offender was a girl. A lively and confident girl appeared before Masaru, who introduced herself with a smile and declared her intention to become his partner. Lancelot, a little embarrassed and displeased, explained that this was his niece, and she was only 19 years old. Despite her age, Adelina has made it clear that she takes her role seriously and is determined to prove her worth. Masaru was puzzled as he tried to understand, since when he had been assigned a guardian, while the girl herself stood with a gloomy expression, waiting for an explanation. Lancelot, finding himself in an awkward position, tried to justify her presence, assuring her that it was part of her desire to broaden her horizons. Despite her protests, she confidently declared that she could handle village life. Masaru, however, was beginning to realize that he would now have to take a determined city girl with him to the village. Adelina watched Masaru with a slight smile, openly admitting that she found him to be an unusual and interesting person. Masaru couldn't help but laugh, realizing that he definitely couldn't avoid adventures now. Lancelot, watching them, just grinned. His own determination was clearly visible in his niece. The young man was getting ready to leave and warned that his return could take several years. Despite this, Adelina firmly decided to accompany him and did not retreat. He wanted to turn the village into a safe place for the beastmen. Even Lancelot, who tried to restrain his niece, realized that arguing was useless. The boy waved goodbye with a smile, cheerfully proclaiming that they would definitely meet again. Lancelot and the others watched them go, hiding a slight anxiety about their upcoming journey. They had to stay to finish some things, and then they set off on the road to a new place. In the evening, they set up a small camp, where everyone dealt with fatigue in their own way. Eventually, they found some strong allies and reached the beastmen. Masaru returned to the familiar village with a smile, where he was immediately greeted by joyful beastmen. The young man confidently explained to the villagers who his companion was, and why she had come. And finally, Mei noticed his arrival while Masaru was talking about his future plans. Mei, unable to hold back her tears, rushed towards Masaru. The goddesses watched the touching scene of reunion with a slight smile. Masaru returned to the village and was immediately surrounded by conversation. The elder admitted that he had underestimated the scale of what had happened. Around the fire, a discussion began about the possible threat from the enemy and the fact that the people would not be against accepting outside help. Those present expressed concern, especially about the technology they had acquired thanks to Masaru. One of the leaders has made a peace treaty, but still fears that the enemies could quickly develop and start a war again. In the morning, the girls near the tents tried to wake Masaru up, reproaching him for wanting to gather everyone for a conversation. One of them noted that he should be more cheerful in the morning. Masaru admitted that he was overtired. Suddenly he got a system message. He got a bonus for developing the world and a new notification. This surprised him, and he decided to check the message. Masaru thought about the message he received and came to the conclusion that the goddess he was interacting with was finally showing some common sense. He realized that he could contact her again At the same time, he noticed that the development of the village affected his skills, and that continuing to work brought rewards. At that moment, the girls called him, and he, watching his characteristics grow, realized that he needed to hurry. Masaru came out to the assembled villagers to tell them the important news. He apologized for the wait and explained that he had gathered everyone to discuss the future of the village. He then revealed that the beastmen who had been enslaved had been successfully freed. However, he warned that they faced a serious problem. The boy spoke to the assembled beastmen and reported that their number was approaching 900. He noted that if everyone arrived in the village, the current infrastructure would be insufficient. He then proposed to build a new city in a separate location to improve living conditions and increase defense capabilities. His words caused surprise, and one of the beastmen asked again if Masaru really intended to build a city. The young man, with a warm smile, voiced his goal to build a safe, peaceful, and joyful city for the beastmen. His words delighted the listeners, and everyone present approved of the idea. One of them noted that Masaru was indeed a reliable person. In the end, they agreed to proceed with the plan. He said that he had something else he wanted to tell. The guy admitted that he hadn't told almost anything about himself to those who trusted him. Masaru explained that he felt awkward about it and decided to finally reveal the truth. His listeners were surprised because no one had ever asked him about his past, thinking that he had good reasons for doing so. At the end, he began to speak, introducing himself by name. Masaru, having gathered his courage, confessed to everyone that he had been transported to this world by the gods. He claimed that he came from another world, which caused shock and bewilderment among the beastmen. There was silence after his words, and he thought that, as he expected, no one would believe such a confession. After Masaru's confession, the beastmen began asking many questions about who the gods were, how he came here, and what another world meant. They surrounded him with obvious interest. Despite their confusion, Masaru tried to explain that even the gods were different in this world. Adelina suggested that this explained his behavior. In the end, they admitted that Masaru had indeed earned their trust, even if he had told them a little late. The elders said that those who live and work nearby are considered family here, and no one sees anything strange in this. Later, several local children surrounded Masaru and began asking him questions about technology, gods, and his origins, interrupting each other and showing keen interest. Masaru quickly tried to assure everyone that he would tell them more about himself over dinner, and even promised to make a bronze statue. He tried to change the conversation and directed the attention of those gathered to more important tasks, such as the need to expand the village. He asked some people to work on strengthening the walls, and the rest come to him later to distribute the tasks. When Adelina and May approached to pick up their errand, he immediately noted that he had something special for them. Masaru asked the girls to help him prepare slaked lime. One of them asked in surprise what it was, and he explained that it was a building material made by adding water to calcium oxide. He added that despite its simplicity, the lime would be their secret weapon for building the city, and one of them asked with a smile if it was difficult. Masaru stood by a large clay oven, confidently explaining how to use it. The girls next to him listened attentively, and in front of them was a container in which he would put the shells. He showed how to pile fuel under the oven and light a fire to make slaked lime. The young man showed the girls a wooden box with a handle, explaining that it was called a bellows and was used to pump air into the stove. He demonstrated how it could be used to maintain a fire by directing the airflow through a special hole. The device's operating scheme allowed the temperature to reach over 1,000 degrees. One of the girls asked with interest what would happen next. One of the girls asked again with surprise about the temperature at which the oven operates, having heard about 1,000 degrees. Masaru explained the difference between the boiling point of water and the malleability of iron by showing the molten material. He added that iron melts at temperatures of 1,500 degrees, depending on the type of fire. After this, a girl named Adelina wondered how exactly such temperatures were measured. When asked how temperature is measured, Masaru admitted with a smile that he himself does not know. He emphasized that theory is much more important. It is safety and the correct application of knowledge. The girl tried to clarify what he meant by this, and the guy explained that he meant the ability to apply knowledge in practice, and not just understand it in theory. Masaru continued his reasoning, pointing out that the correct use of technology depends on its level of development. He emphasized that technology always comes with responsibility, and it is important to think about the consequences of its use. He explained that the same invention can be both beneficial and harmful, depending on the circumstances. He then addressed the girls, saying that mistakes are inevitable and reminding them that it is important to think about goals even if they have to fail. Masaru, with a kind smile, placed his hands on the girls' heads and said that failures help one to better understand how to act correctly. He emphasized the importance of remembering one's past in order to move forward, and expressed confidence in this. Masaru said with confidence that everything would now go according to plan, and suggested starting with a warm-up. He noted that he already had a plan and a suitable location for the future city. He also added that the area would need to be leveled to prepare it for construction. Masaru stood on the perfectly leveled platform and watched the result in amazement. He admitted that the skills he had learned from the slot machine still scared him. Realizing how much power he had, he cursed under his breath, wondering how this was even possible. The guy looked at the piece of land covered with hard rock and realized that the proposed place, although conveniently located, required special treatment. He admitted that he couldn't ask the rabbit people to help with such heavy material. Weighing his options, he wondered if he could handle it himself, but in the end he decided to act, because without trying you won't learn anything. The young man looked at the leveled area with satisfaction and noted that he had created it 100 meters in size. He understood that he would need about 6 hours of rest to restore his magic. Despite his initial plan to proceed gradually, he realized that he could accomplish the task of clearing the land in a few days, although he felt nervous about the work ahead. The boy carefully examined the surrounding landscape and suddenly noticed something suspicious under the cliffs located to the north. Disturbing images appeared in his memory, and he screamed with a frightened expression, realizing something important. The young man suddenly exclaimed, realizing something important, and was surprised to realize that he had completely forgotten about it. He quickly ran forward, remembering that ever since he arrived in this world, he had needed one thing. Finding this thing had been his top priority, and now he finally noticed traces of it. Masaru, standing on the rock, exclaimed, noticing a lot of slugs below. The elder expressed his gratitude to Masaru for his help in the village and support in the construction. He admitted that he trusted him completely. While they were talking, a slug appeared in the box, causing surprise among those around them. Masaru calmly confirmed that it was an ordinary slug, as can be seen with the naked eye. The village elder was alarmed to see that the slugs were magical creatures and questioned Masaru's common sense. He confidently stated, however, that he was going to use them to clean up the trash and remove waste. Masaru explained that the slug had been docile and harmless all along. The guy said that during his stay in the Empire, he read a lot and learned about magical creatures that are not hostile to people and can coexist with them, and therefore be used as a resource, like wood or stone. He enthusiastically stated that he wanted to test this out in practice, planning to build a toilet with their help, which surprised those around him. The elder thought about his words, admitting that he had never considered magical beasts as a resource. He explained that his goal is to use slugs, for example, to dispose of waste, and at the same time to find out how useful they are in everyday needs. And he confirmed that he was going to test what kind of food the slug could digest, as well as study its weaknesses in order to learn how to control such creatures in the future. The village chief understood his intentions and promised to tell the villagers everything, noting that if they could create a farm, it would help improve the food supply. The elder, hearing about the idea, thought about it and noted that the first step to success was breeding slugs. The boy recorded his observations of the slug, which he believed to be a magical beast, describing in detail its appearance, a translucent green creature about 60 centimeters in size. He noted that the slug was unable to climb higher than its height and rolled down because its point of support during movement was located below the center of gravity. Having concluded that the creature was primitive, the observer, with an expression of horror on his face, came to the conclusion that the slug was an extremely unintelligent creature, lacking even the basic ability to coordinate. The guy conducted an experiment by throwing various debris like leaves and wood into a box of slime to test its food preferences and recycling capabilities. The creature happily devoured the contents and slowly digested them, then vented the remains, demonstrating its tolerance to waste. He noted that the slime was particularly fond of plant materials and might eventually be able to fully digest them. Having convinced himself of its effectiveness, he concluded that the village would not have problems with waste disposal. But an unexpected remark from the outside made him wary. The boy ran up to the slug, which had shrunk noticeably and looked weak with concern. He picked it up, wondering how this could have happened, and wondering what the possible causes were. Realizing that the slug might be suffering from dehydration, he exclaimed the word water with horror in his eyes. The guy came to the conclusion that the main weakness of the mucus was dehydration, and upon further research, he found out that fire and seawater also harmed it. He developed a hypothesis based on the creature's unique properties, which allowed him to improve his methods of handling it. With the help of volunteers who volunteered to help grow the slime, the creatures became much easier to control, and the organization of their care was quicker. Masaru theorized that the slimes may be part of this world's natural self-cleaning mechanism, as when the creature is placed in polluted water, it absorbs all the dirt, leaving the liquid clean. His hypothesis arose from observations of how mucus copes with cleaning the environment. The experiments he conducted allowed him to be convinced of the amazing abilities of these creatures, and he noted with enthusiasm that this world is full of unpredictable and amazing discoveries. The boy noted that it was good that the villagers no longer objected to the slimes, but reminded that magical beasts could still be dangerous. The girl with the ears wondered if it was possible to make a pet out of a slug, since people were starting to get used to them. In response, he sadly said that slugs are still monsters, not pets, and one should not forget about their nature. The headman looked at the boy doubtfully, surprised by his intention. He was annoyed that he had reported this in the middle of the work related to the slugs, when everyone was busy, and he wondered if he was seriously going to leave the village again just to collect materials. Adelina tried to defend him, saying that he probably had reasons that would become clear later, even if his actions seemed strange. The guy admitted that there are not enough materials in the village even for current needs, so he would like to preserve as much of the surrounding area as possible. He explained that he thinks about the future of the city and tries to manage resources rationally, which is what prompted his actions. Hearing this, the headman and the others expressed their willingness to help him, and he was glad of their support. He asked to assemble a team to collect seeds and seedlings to later plant trees and restore the forest. The guy explained that pre-planted seedlings will help prepare for future needs, because they take months and years to grow, but can be cut down in minutes. He called it greening and emphasized the importance of preserving the natural environment when collecting wood. These actions will help provide the village with wood without destroying the surrounding landscape. May added that he gained this knowledge while working at the home center, although he was not an expert in growing plants. May asked how many seedlings would need to be planted, and Adelina noted that the guy was thinking 10 steps ahead again. He explained that he was going to collect different fruit trees, grow them in the village, and then transplant them to the mountains. After completing his preparations, he plans to set out on his journey alone, much to the girl's surprise and concern. The next morning, the girls joyfully called out to the guy and offered to go on the journey with him, despite his intention to go alone. The warrior said that she saw this as a great opportunity to broaden her horizons, and the girl with ears added that she was well-versed in herbs and could help. The guy tried to refuse the girls, but they immediately made it clear that they were not going to back down. Adelina firmly stated that they would go together themselves, since they had no other plans for the next few days. He gave in, asking them to strictly follow his instructions, and wondered when the two had managed to become so close. The hero and the girls went deep into the forest to begin searching for the necessary materials, reminding them that they needed to collect not only wood, but also boulders. He explained that he had agreed with the headman on a landscaping project and suggested that they also collect seeds, seedlings, edible, and medicinal plants. May noted that the trees would grow very large over time, and the guy added that symbiosis with nature is extremely important. He also urged caution because they were in a wild area full of dangerous plants and animals. The warrior repeated the word symbiosis with interest, and the girl with ears noticed that the guy often spoke too intelligently. He explained that, in his world, the development of civilization led to the extinction of many species, as people disturbed the natural balance. The hero suggested that humanity could harm the entire planet, and expressed a desire to prevent the same from happening in the new world. He hopes that all creatures here will be able to live in harmony, because they are the beloved children of the gods. The guy sheepishly admitted that he might have overdone it in trying to express himself effectively. One of them said with cheerful confidence that if such things were said by someone who had met the gods, then there was definitely truth in it. The girls enthusiastically raised their hands and cheerfully suggested starting to collect resources, anticipating something interesting. Adelina carefully stacked the logs and breathed a sigh of relief, pleased with the result of her work. They discussed the materials they had collected and noticed that the guy had been gone for quite some time. One of them decided to go look for him, and the other wondered where he could have gone. One of the girls, looking wary, reported hearing the sounds of a sword, picking them up with her sensitive ears. Everyone immediately became wary, realizing that this could mean a fight, and assumed that the boy was fighting. One of the girls went to his side to check what was going on. Coming closer, she called out to him worriedly, trying to make sure he was okay. Masaru fought with force, delivering a powerful blow that sent debris and objects flying. At this time, he noticed something flying to the side and screamed in panic, warning his friend of the danger. The girl was surprised to catch the strange creature that suddenly pressed itself against her, causing her shock. The boy justified himself, explaining that he had not expected his discarded creature to behave like that. He admitted that he had tried to escape, but had been attacked by magical beasts. May happily showed him a huge worm and explained that it lived underground and fed on insects. The boy noted with interest that it looked like creatures from his home world. He realized that it was thanks to such creatures that plants in this world grew especially well. The heroes looked at the huge worm with interest, discussing its properties and ways of moving underground with the help of magic. One of the companions was surprised that it did not leave holes behind, and another participant explained that worms are able to shift the soil in order to move through it. May said she had heard about the possibility of using the worm to create bows. Later, she noted the value and price of materials from such creatures in the manufacture of high-quality weapons, especially bows. The rabbit girl explained that the worm's muscles were very strong and elastic, which is why they were used to make bowstrings and leather armor. The boy noted that the material turned out to be unexpectedly useful and asked if such creatures were hunted. Having heard an affirmative answer, he thought about it, and Adelina added that worms were well paid, but not everyone could defeat them. The girl with the ears smiled happily, reminding him that they were talking about his brother, and added that it went without saying. The guy thought about adding hunting magical beasts to his list of future activities. The group discussed that they usually hunt lizards and insects for materials, but birds can be useful too. The girl said that she could find the target by the special sounds they make. May suddenly became alert and looked into the darkness with alarm, sensing danger approaching. A huge beast with an evil look appeared from the bushes, causing her to become frightened and frozen. The rest of the group quickly reacted to her reaction and ran to find out what had happened. She barely uttered a word, pointing to the source of the threat. The guy remembered the expression on the rabbit girl's face the moment they first met, and realized that this time, her fear was even stronger. He tensed, sensing the approaching threat, and prepared for battle. Meanwhile, the girl anxiously grabbed her friend's hem, despite her confidence in her companion's strength, not wanting him to leave alone. The rabbit girl screamed in despair, begging her companion not to fight, because, according to her, this time everything was really dangerous and he could die. The guy, noticing her tears and fear, gently promised that he would not fight. The guy firmly stated that they first needed to find out what exactly they were dealing with, since being around this creature was dangerous. The rabbit girl anxiously asked if he would return immediately, to which he nodded confidently. After a short farewell, he went deeper into the forest, leaving his companions behind. The young man breathed heavily, leaning against a tree, realizing that he had managed to get out alive. He thought about the strange creatures he had just seen, a huge beast resembling a bear with 4 limbs, and an unusual horse with 6 legs. He assumed it was a fight for territory and decided to see if he could extract useful information using his skills. Masaru looked closely at the fallen creature as information emerged, identifying it as a mutated, quote, Savannah storming horse. He learned that such beasts appear when there is an excess of magic in the body, and have horns that can pierce even metal. The hero wondered why the animal ran away, because it looked too dangerous to avoid a fight. The boy noticed that it was starting to rain and realized that it was time to end the search. He decided to return to the girls and be sure to report what had happened to the village elder. While it was raining outside, the boy told about his encounter with a dangerous creature, and the elder explained that it was a demon bear. He remembered how similar magical beasts had appeared before, especially when they lived in the coastal town. The heroes discussed how lucky they were to escape danger, and the guy joked that it was worth listening to May. The chief explained that the demon bear usually retreats when rain approaches. Adelina panicked, but the elder explained that the current downpour marked the beginning of the rainy season. The elder said that during the rainy season, the forests and fields turn into a large lake, and the water level can rise to the knee. He assured that if they prepared in advance, there would be no problems, because even a demon bear would not be able to move freely in such conditions. And Masaru wondered how much time they had to prepare. The young man suddenly stood up from his seat and, not hiding his irritation, headed towards the exit of the tent, interrupting the conversation about animals. He abruptly declared that the bear theme no longer bothered him, because he could no longer bear to eat the same thing. With despair on his face, he loudly complained that in the village they only served meat, and his taste buds were suffering from it. The girls looked at him with surprise as he hurriedly asked to be given just one day to look for something else. The boy ran out of the village with enthusiasm, clenching his fist and loudly declaring that he was going to find food. He quickly crossed the flooded fields, not paying attention to the puddles and mud, and soon found himself in a large pond. His gaze fell on a strange creature in the water, which began to raise its head, causing him to be surprised. Masaru watched in surprise as a huge crab with powerful claws suddenly emerged from the water. Before he could react, he found himself grabbed by the clothes by one of the claws and lifted into the air. The next second, he deftly pulled out an item from his inventory, intending to deal with it. He raised a huge crab, caught in the lake after a surprise attack, over his head with a joyful cry. He rejoiced at his luck and immediately began to examine the trophy with the help of magical abilities, determining its characteristics. The description confirmed that it was a rare species, capable of changing color in the water and reaching a meter in length. Down below, he realized with surprise that he had found a place truly rich in resources. The boy continued to explore the area and discovered many rare creatures, each with a description. He caught a huge crab with powerful claws, then noticed a poisonous toad and a rare turtle that lived underground. Each animal had unique properties and was of interest both for food and for other purposes. He was amazed by the richness of the surrounding nature and recognized that he had found himself in a truly valuable place. The young man suddenly noticed the appearance of the sorceress and recoiled sharply, frightened by her unexpected appearance. The girl calmly asked him what he was muttering and asked him about his reaction. He tried to justify himself, saying that he was not used to such situations and asked for some time to come to his senses. The goddess noted with a smile that she had not appeared just like that, but with the blessing of the goddess, and added that he had no reason to panic. The goddess, embarrassed, explained that she had not been watching him out of curiosity, but had simply happened to be nearby. The guy, noticing her interest, enthusiastically began to share his spoils and offered to try the prepared food. He remarked that the food was delicious, and invited her to celebrate the find with him. The girl followed him with surprise, curious about human food that she had probably never tried. The guy proudly showed off the shelter he had built, which was supposed to protect them from the rain. Victinius praised the design, noting that it looked sturdy despite the simple materials. He suggested starting to cook the crab, reminding them that the dish would be simple but delicious. The goddess carefully adjusted the hood on the boy's head, clearly caring about his comfort in the rain. He looked at her in surprise, not immediately understanding her intentions. He tried to figure out in his mind why she had done this, and with slight confusion he voiced a guess. In response, she jerked her hand away. Victinius calmly told the boy to be quiet and start a fire, not allowing him to continue the conversation. He looked at her in surprise but nodded obediently, accepting her instructions. She briefly explained that she was doing all this not for his sake, but solely of her own free will. Sometime later, the two of them were sitting by the fire, and the guy was watching her with a barely noticeable smile. The guy ceremoniously placed a large dish of boiled crab on the table and announced that everything was ready. The goddess watched the presentation with interest, but tried to cope with the shell a little embarrassedly. She admitted that she couldn't open it. The shell was too hard. The guy explained how to pull the crab properly and handed her the claw, and she, having gathered her courage, decided to try. The goddess tried the crab meat and unexpectedly expressed delight at its taste. She described the dish as incredibly delicious, with a vibrant combination of umami and sweetness. The guy watched her reaction with a satisfied smile, realizing that he had managed to surprise her. He decided he had to hurry and get more before all the food was gone. Victinius thanked the guy for the treat, admitted that it was the first time she tried such a dish, and asked for some food for her sister Ayr. He remembered the sorceress's sister, noting how caring she had been when they first met. Masaru smiled and said that there was still some food left, and let her take a portion. Meanwhile, he thought about how to preserve the taste of the crab, deciding to use the inventory. During the conversation at the table, the sorceress noted that it was interesting to watch the guy. He cooks, forges swords, and makes tools. He explained that it is not just about skills, but about knowledge and the ability to apply them. Otherwise, the abilities are useless. The goddess was surprised by his explanation, and the guy admitted that he used to work as a handyman at a home center. So she realized that this is what he meant by his skills. The guy recalled how he worked in a home center in the countryside, which was open from early morning until late at night. He learned how to care for plants and interacted with local farmers, especially during the planting season. Through this work, he learned a variety of skills, from construction and bricklaying to electrical work, animal care, and first aid. This wide range of experience made him a jack of all trades. The young man explained that his knowledge arose from the need to solve many problems alone. He emphasized that skills are useless if you cannot apply them in practice. The girl was surprised to learn that he himself had fixed the system error he had encountered. The conversation also brought up the topic of the statue erected in his honor, which made him feel embarrassed and the girl feel proud. He admitted that they needed to deal with the demon bear, otherwise the new arrivals to the city could get hurt. He understood that the reason for his visit was hunting, but he avoided the topic. The girl listened to his thoughts with a worried look. In conclusion, he noted that all this time, he was simply distracted from the main threat. The guy admitted that he avoided talking about the demon bear, but the girl immediately objected that she did not consider this running away. She emphasized that he is not one to give up, because he has amazing abilities. Hearing this, the guy was a little embarrassed, but noted that he did not expect to hear even a mention of the statue created in his honor. The girl indignantly declared that she would never forgive the guy. He watched her reaction with bewilderment and then teased her by comparing her to a child. Despite this, he admitted that he could not remain idle forever. Inside the fortified camp, work was in full swing, with builders discussing how to strengthen the walls and where there was a shortage of clay and straw. One of the workers reported that they had almost completed the section at the entrance. The guy approached the fortification and assessed its strength, noting that the structure turned out to be quite reliable. The rabbit villager reported that they had almost completed the shooting platform. He approved of her efforts and advised her to continue in the same spirit as the others. They now felt safer, since in case of an attack, they would be able to defend themselves from higher ground. One of the assistants asked if it was possible to get more stone building materials, as he had to strengthen the defenses on the outskirts. He reported that traps were still being set outside the city. Masaru noted that he had strengthened the defense to the point that the current level was sufficient, and continued to coordinate the construction. The hero admitted that he would like to spend time on leveling up, but protecting the village is more important to him now. The boy thought about the fact that he had acquired a new skill that wasn't related to combat, and decided that it was because of what he had eaten today. He noted that it was a little different from normal fire magic. The girl with the ears looked at him in surprise, trying to understand what he meant. The young man asked if any of the rabbits knew how to use it. The guy suggested that one of the rabbits might have fire magic, but the girl doubted it. She said that foxes might have something similar, and the guy decided to ask the fox to check. He said that he might ask Lancelot to send a couple of foxes there. Masaru suggested that one of the rabbits might have fire magic, but the girl doubted it. The guy noted that since arriving in this world, he had never seen a real magician. He added that he had never met rabbits who used magic. Then he asked the girl how many magicians they had met in one of the cities. She remembered that there were 2 people there who could control water. In this world full of swords and magic, there were so few mages, and the guy noted with irritation how useless the goddess turned out to be. Masaru suddenly received a message on the screen in front of him. In the letter, the goddess Era Sephira said that she was going to explain how to use magic in this world. The others were surprised to see the device and the text. He explained that such messages appeared every time the goddess contacted him. The goddess began her explanation of magic, telling about the current state of the skill and its use in this world. She mentioned that animal, demon, and human civilizations had not advanced beyond the observation stage. Despite the existence of magical animals, magic had hardly developed. The goddess expressed hope that the boy would help open the way to its use. He asked in surprise if he was really expected to program magic. The young man thought about it and suggested that he could use healing magic. The others looked at him in surprise. Instead of technical explanations, he focused on the idea of spreading knowledge that could become the basis for using magic in this world. He admitted that he did not know a single magical principle. He suggested building several institutions so that as many people as possible could study magic. The boy enthusiastically declared that he needed to build a school to spread knowledge of magic. He described how, in his world, children start learning at the age of 6 and spend about 9 years in school, learning different subjects. He called this place the source of knowledge. The girl noticed that this world also had its own technologies and suggested a suitable way to explain the differences between the worlds. Masaru enthusiastically showed the smartphone to the others, stating that it was cutting-edge technology from his world. The girls looked at the device with interest, not understanding its purpose. One of them thought it was a box. When he tried to turn it on, the screen did not light up, and he realized to his surprise that he had forgotten to charge the device. He explained that this was due to the stopping of time and space, and also noted that some creatures could die there. The young man began to explain to those present what functions a smartphone performs, and gave the example of the ability to communicate with people at a distance. He also mentioned listening to thousands of songs, taking photos and videos, and connecting to the internet, comparing it to a huge dictionary. The girls listened in amazement, trying to understand the essence of the device. At the end, he offered to demonstrate the functions in action, and everyone responded with interest. Masaru suddenly realized that he had gotten too carried away and had forgotten about the main thing, after which he jumped up in fright. He reflected on the difficulties of teaching magic, admitting that he could not teach those who did not even know the basics. Inwardly, he was worried about what was happening and wondered what Sapphira was thinking. Realizing that his own knowledge was limited to healing, he asked Victinius with doubt how he could be of help. The goddess appeared and confidently declared that everything was simple, because the guy already knew how to use magic. He tried to clarify that he only knew healing magic, but she reacted sharply, deciding that he had deceived her. She pounced on him with reproaches, accusing him of deliberately concealing the truth. The guy calmly explained that he already knew about it, but wanted to hear her opinion, expecting her to notice his weak points. The girl reminded the boy that he had already used magic during the fight with Lancelot. She suggested that he had done it unconsciously, strengthening his sword with magic. The boy thought about it and gave an example of another fight with bandits in the mountains. To this, the girl replied that he had not used magic then, but his skills. Masaru explained that the skills granted by the gods take the form of objects familiar to humans, and in his case, these were the home center and gaming devices. She added that the use of healing magic requires both medical knowledge and time for the process itself. The young man thought about the strangeness of his abilities, admitting that he had always considered them unusual. He realized that he was trying to use what was simpler and more useful for him, and wondered how to use magic in combat. The girl asked the guy if he was familiar with the sensation of magical energy flowing through his body when activating a skill. He admitted that he had actually felt it once. She explained that understanding this flow and being able to direct it was the basis for using magic. She then suggested that he imagine the mana flowing inside him and use it as a source of energy. The young man enthusiastically agreed to try, and the girl restrainedly showed that she could do it herself. The girl tried to justify herself, saying that she was not afraid of punishment from Hera, but she was noticeably nervous. The guy questioned her intentions, asking if she cared about him or just wanted to get out of it. She flared up, citing her reasons, but eventually lost her temper and hit him with her divine fist. Despite this, he quietly asked to be allowed to help, hinting that he still cared about what was happening. The goddess sadly admitted that her attitude towards magic was connected to her younger sister, the goddess of magic Iris Shira. She added that as an older sister, she could only take responsibility. The guy calmly replied that he had no complaints about magic and simply admired her care for her sister. The boy began to study magic daily after he learned more about the girl's character. At the same time, the villagers completed the construction of the defense against the demon bear. The village gradually returned to normal life, and people began to enjoy peaceful days again. Masaru was upset that the bear never showed up, despite all the preparations to protect the village. The others were relieved that he was gone, but reminded them that they always had to be prepared. He suggested that they not disband the group, as the threat could return next year. He was reminded that even the arrows he made would be useful for hunting, and that the village was now safe, which softened his mood a little. The guy talked about the design of arrows, which he improved by adding reverse points to increase their effectiveness when hitting the target. He also mentioned the possibility of strengthening the tips, making the weapon even more dangerous. The girls listened with interest, and he noted that such arrows could not be pulled out without damage. One of the residents admitted that their hunting party highly appreciated the weapon they created, even though it became a truly deadly tool. He said that he used the wood of the tree to make arrows, thus increasing their strength. When asked about the black bow, he said that it was much superior to the ordinary one in quality. One of the residents tried to try it out, but noted that the bowstring was too tight. This caused a slight awkwardness, and everyone noted the difficulty of handling such a weapon. One of the warriors tried to pull the string of the black bow, but he had difficulty doing so and felt awkward. The others noticed that even the strongest of them could barely hold the weapon. Masaru explained that the shooting technique was the same as he taught others, and demonstrated the shot himself. His movements were confident, and he pulled the bowstring easily, causing surprise among those around him. The boy fired an arrow with such force that it pierced several targets in a row and impressed everyone watching. One of the hunters noted that it looked more like a destructive shot than a normal shooting. The hero thought about it, realizing that perhaps he instinctively enhanced the shot with magic. He was surprised that it happened unconsciously, and began to understand how his previous practice of magic could have affected the result. Suddenly, a loud roar was heard in the forest, causing panic among the villagers. They decided that the sound belonged to the demon bear and began to urgently gather. The guy tried to stop them, claiming that the roar had nothing to do with him. The protagonist, listening closely, realized that this roar sounded as if the creature was in pain. Some hunters noticed that the direction of the sound coincided with the northern cliff and suggested that the monster could live there. The sergeant asked with a serious expression whether the boy would be able to handle the situation, to which he confidently replied so that there would be no doubt about him. He quickly began giving orders, asking to gather all the fighters at the protective wall and contact the village headman for evacuation. He then announced that he would personally lead the group and head to the place where the bear had appeared. The night girl called out to him in alarm, but he was determined to act. The young man handed over the responsibility of the village to the female knight, asking her to look after the villagers. She nodded seriously, confirming that she would take care of everything. A group of hunters led by a young man set out from the village in a fighting mood. He loudly announced the beginning of the hunt for the demon bear, and the knight called on everyone to fight for protection and peace. After the hunters left, the village was in an uproar, with cries of alarm and anticipation heard everywhere. The night girl tried to calm the younger ones, assuring them that everything would be fine. Adelina confidently said that she believed in the hero, and even encouraged the others. May was a little embarrassed, but also smiled, saying that she believed in success. The hunters fired an arrow, and as expected, it hit the demon bear right in the eye. The boy watched the scene with a determined expression. He realized that it was time to act, and gave the order to lure the monster into a pre-prepared trap. Masaru suggested using pre-positioned archers to shoot at the beast from a higher position. He decided to act as bait himself to lure the demonic bear into the trap area. As the beast began to approach, he gave the command to fire the first shot. As the demon bear approached, a barrage of arrows rained down from above. The archers began their attack on cue, officially launching the pre-planned operation. The boy deftly dodged the blow of the huge beast and quickly assessed the depth of the arrow's impact. He realized that the wound was not fatal and he needed to act differently. Taking a step back, he shouted at the beast to attract its attention. Starting to run away, he thereby drew it into a battle of endurance. Masaru lunged forward, intending to deliver the finishing blow, but the monster suddenly lunged at him with a furious roar. He barely had time to react, crying out in tension as the huge paw was already approaching. His face was frozen in alarm, but he did not retreat and prepared to take the blow. The boy watched with alarm as the huge beast suddenly went on the attack. He realized that the arrow that was fired earlier had almost no effect. Memories of the poison that some hunting arrows were coated with came back to him. The thought of poisoned weapons gave him an idea of what was happening. He noticed that the poison had begun to act, and his guess was confirmed. He had previously considered the words about the poison an exaggeration, but now he was convinced of their truth. At this moment, a second shot rang out from the cliff, and the arrow hit the target accurately. Inspired, he continued to move forward, without losing concentration. The huge monster roared in pain as a rain of sharp spears rained down on it from above. It raised its paw in an attempt to defend itself, but multiple blows had already pierced its body, pinning it to the ground. The boy watched the defeated monster with tension, arrows sticking out of its body. He fell to his knees, breathing heavily after the fight, and the monster, letting out a final roar, finally lost its strength. The young man exclaimed with joy, looking at the defeated beast and realizing that they had succeeded. He could hardly believe that they had managed to defeat the huge bear on their own. Reflecting on the experience, he noticed that the level had increased. Smiling, he looked at the screen, surprised at how much his stats had increased. The young man breathed a sigh of relief, happy that the battle was over, and suggested that they return home as soon as possible. The voices of the knights were heard from the cliff, promising to join them and hold a celebration in honor of the victory. However, looking at the body of the beast, he noticed a strange movement and realized with fear that it was showing signs of life. The assistants asked in surprise what had happened, but he only whispered that the beast was returning. A real demon bear suddenly appeared behind the boy, far more terrifying than the beast he had defeated. He realized with horror that he had been fighting the wrong creature all this time. The rabbit knight cried out in alarm as he noticed the danger, and the boy froze, realizing the scale of the impending threat. His voice wavered as he acknowledged that he was facing a real enemy. The hero gathered all his strength into one blow and rushed forward with his sword aimed straight at his enemy. At the moment of impact, his expression changed to one of determination, and the monster opened its mouth in fury, preparing for the final throw. The young man panicked as he realized that there was more than one monster in front of him. A second demon bear was approaching him. One of the monsters attacked with fury, destroying trees and the ground in its path. The young man tried to dodge, not believing what was happening. He found himself pinned to a tree by the monster's paw and was struggling to get out. He screamed loudly, overcome with fear and despair. The giant beast was getting closer and closer, looming over him. Despite the horror, the young man continued to fight for his life. The hero barely managed to jump back when the beast's claws cut the ground with force. The huge bear attacked with fury, not giving a second of respite. The area around shook from the blow, leaving deep marks. The knight prepared to enter the battle and shouted at the monster to retreat. The demon bear tore the arrows out of his body in fury, ignoring the pain. The girls on the cliff watched in horror and could not believe their eyes. One of them exclaimed that the monster had caught the arrow in midair. Everyone's faces reflected shock from the beast's inhuman reaction. The huge demon bear roared in rage and advanced, raising its paw to strike. One of the warriors noticed its movement and ordered everyone to take up positions again. At his command, the archers prepared for another volley. The creature glared at the enemies with hatred, preparing for another attack. Masaru found himself on the ground in front of the attacking monster, but managed to dodge the blow of the clawed paw. The demonic beast roared, preparing for another attack. The hero rose with difficulty, smirking and provoking his opponent. He made it clear that he was not going to give up, and was still able to continue the fight. The boy with the rabbit ears was overcome with anxiety over the wounded warrior's condition, and tried to stop him. Despite the alarm of his comrades, the hero stood up, assessing his chances and strength. He noted that he could still move and remembered the locations of the remaining traps. Gathering his strength, he rushed to the right place, hoping to use his last chance. The hero was running away from the beast with difficulty, dodging its blows. He clenched his teeth and kept moving, despite the fatigue and pain. The thought was in his head that if he could get to the right place, he would have a chance. He sped up with his last strength, hoping to make it in time. The young man desperately stretched his hand forward, trying to run to the right point. The huge beast with its open mouth had already swung its clawed paw at him. The thought that he might not make it in time pierced his consciousness. Masaru dropped to one knee, breathing heavily and clutching his wounded arm. The huge bear was gaining on him, closing the distance with every step. He realized with regret that he had used his healing ability too often. There were only 100 meters left to the desired point, but he had almost no strength left. The young man was left alone in front of the beast, which was already raising its paw to strike. He could hardly hold back his tears, realizing that he could die. Inside, he mentally said goodbye to those who had become dear to him during this time. Despite the fear, he did not look away and remained in place. The boy looked up, his expression stony, as the beast's claws loomed over his head. He was breathing heavily, but he didn't flinch. Determination was brewing inside him, and he whispered a response, holding back the pain. Despite his fear, he wasn't going to give up. Determination was brewing inside him, and he whispered the answer softly, holding back the pain. Despite the fear, he was not going to give up. A girl with a sword suddenly jumped out from behind the guy and dealt a powerful blow to the beast. He turned around in surprise, not expecting such an attack. The guy watched what was happening in amazement, hugging the creature to himself. His inner thoughts told him that everything that was happening could be nothing more than part of someone's observation. Adelina stepped forward with determination, her weapon at the ready, her gaze steady. She calmly stated her intention to intervene in what was happening. Adelina delivered a powerful blow, knocking the enemy to the ground. Masaru, surprised, recognized her and thanked her for saving him. She admitted with a slight grin that she would have been a little late if not for her companion. Despite the victory, she attributed the success not only to herself, but also to outside help. After the boy went after the demonic bear, the two girls stopped at a wooden building. One of them looked thoughtfully at her friend, who tried to cheer her up with a slight smile. The second girl, noticing this, quietly called her by name. Lancelot's niece listened attentively to her friend, who shared her doubts. Despite rumors of defeat, she expressed confidence in the guy's actions. She assured her interlocutor that she did not see a problem with this, and emphasized that making mistakes is natural. May shared a strange feeling she had. She heard two voices. Inside one voice, she heard a second. Although she knew it was impossible, the fear grew stronger at the mere thought of it. May tearfully begged her sister to help. She screamed for her brother to be saved. Meanwhile, the guy watching the action was thinking about the recent help from the other girl and how he wanted to go home. He admitted that the hit was good, but it was not enough to win. A massive horned beast appeared from behind the trees, approaching menacingly. The girl with the weapon stepped forward, standing between the monster and the wounded boy. He tried to call out to her, begging her to step back and not risk her life. She defiantly replied that he was mistaken if he thought she would go on a dangerous mission alone without a plan. At the moment when the horned beast prepared to attack, one of the fighters gave the signal. Archers and spearmen jumped out from cover from different sides, instantly surrounding the monster. The huge beast was surrounded on all sides when a scream rang out on cue. The commander called for no fear and to move forward, inspiring everyone to attack. The hero watched with relief as his allies came to his aid at the most necessary moment. The girl with the spear confidently walked forward, confirming that they had relied on May's plan and arrived on time. The group of hunters continued to drive the monster to the edge of the cliff, not giving him a second to rest. The girl with the spear reminded everyone that there was a trap under the rock, and all that was left was to push a little harder. One of the monsters was already on the verge of falling when the command was given to give another push. The huge beast tore off the edge and flew down, but at the last second, its blow caused unexpected damage. The girl knight standing in front did not have time to react and looked at what was happening in surprise. The fighters who rushed forward found themselves in the danger zone. Masaru brought his sword down with force, delivering a blow while the girl behind him cried out in support. After that, he confidently declared that he could handle the rest. The other fighters sighed with relief, and one of the girls thanked everyone for their help. The boy stood among his allies, grateful that he was no longer fighting alone. Thanks to their support, he was able to regain his strength and was ready for the final blow. Turning to the enemy, he rushed into the attack with determination. His eyes were shining, and his voice was confident of victory. The boy was standing next to the girls when the monster suddenly rushed forward. He turned around when he heard a scream, but it was too late. The monster's paw hit the ground with force. The girl in armor opened her eyes in fear, not having time to react. Everything was happening too fast for anyone to intervene. The hero held back the monster's furious attack, dodging the blows. He took advantage of the moment to counterattack with full force. The forceful thrust struck the monster in the chest, causing it to stagger back. The beast began to lose its balance and let out a deafening roar. The young man suddenly leaped forward and delivered the final blow. The enemy's huge body fell to the ground, defeated. Masaru pushed off the ground with all his might and jumped at his opponent, holding the spear in his hands. At that moment, determination flashed in his eyes, and he said a firm no, not intending to give in. The huge crossbow fired a heavy bolt, and the weapon pierced the target with force. He jumped aside at the last moment as a huge bolt smashed through the ground between him and the beast, sending rocks flying in all directions as the beast staggered back, shocked by the sudden attack. The boy said the last words coldly, looking at the monster trapped in the sharp thorns. He looked down at it as if saying goodbye. The girl below watched the events with concern, while a tense silence reigned all around. A massive trap, studded with sharp spikes, opened up among the trees. In the very center of it was the raised paw of a defeated beast. Adelina ran to the edge of the cliff, looking down at the stake trap in horror. Her voice shook as she called out to the boy, hoping for an answer. Tears began to gather in the corners of her eyes as it became clear that he might be down there. Her face froze in anxious anticipation. He sat at the edge of the trap, barely catching his breath after the fight, and looked at the worried girl. He confirmed with a smile that he had heard her scream and joked about how it looked like he had actually died. The girl froze in amazement, realizing that he was unharmed. The guy lay relaxed on the ground while the girl approached him with relief, loudly calling his name. He tried to justify himself, but she flared up, slapped him, and reproached him for making everyone worry. The companions watched the scene with mixed emotions. The girl was clearly trying to hide her excitement behind a rude reaction. Masaru, lying on the ground, told how during the fall he managed to catch hold of the edge of the cliff using a log. The girl, after listening to him, emphasized with relief that this was what helped save his life. He noted with a smile that a more reliable salvation could not be imagined. One of the fighters joyfully announced that the demon bear was defeated and no longer breathed. Adelina smiled with relief, glad that it was all over, and the guy confirmed that it was their victory. But immediately after that, he began to lose consciousness, which alarmed everyone around him. His companions ran up to him, concerned about his condition. The boy suddenly collapsed, exhausted, causing everyone to become alarmed. He fell asleep right in the girl's arms, causing the others to sigh in relief. Another knight noted that he was simply exhausted. The girl smiled softly, confirming that everything had ended as it should. The boy smiled with relief when he heard praise for his work. He quietly confirmed that everything had worked out. The cliff overlooked the camp, and the companions were already preparing to return. Their victory ended with a triumphant return home. At the training grounds, several rabbit-like villagers were working on a structure and saw warriors coming from the forest. Mei ran forward, waving her hand cheerfully. The goddesses watched the events from the screen while enjoying their tea. Hera noted how well the guy had done and turned to her companion. She agreed and wondered if he had finally realized that he was the chosen one. Victinius exclaimed that the boy could die from such a pace and demanded that he be left alone. Hera asked with a grin who had gone to the underworld to cheer him up before the battle and why it was necessary. The goddess calmly noted that her actions were not intentional, since she was obligated to take care of Masaru as her apostle. At the table, another woman questioned the truth of the reason, and emphasized that everything looked different. She reminded that the rules of the gods do not justify everything that happens. In concluding the conversation, the interlocutors noted that after the victory over the bear, order was restored in the world, and the construction of the temple dedicated to the goddess is progressing actively. Two girls raised their cups, offering to celebrate the hero's victory. One of them proposed a toast to the development of the new world, and the other one joined in with a smile. Against the backdrop of the evening camp, a group of characters, including rabbit-like girls and a guy, gathered around the table, cheerfully raising their mugs. A few days later, the guy gathered everyone and reminded them that they had managed to defeat the demonic bear. He enthusiastically suggested starting to build the city, but in response he did not hear the expected enthusiasm. One of the rabbit-like residents asked doubtfully whether the construction site was really that huge. The guy was surprised by what he heard and noticed strange things in the form of a white line and a fence. Masaru stood in front of the construction site with the prepared materials and foundation, looking at the scale of the future construction. In the distance, mountains stretched out, and in the background, the outlines of the initial structures were visible. Several residents looked at him attentively, waiting for instructions. The plan indicated that this was where the city called Kemonokito was planned to be built. The hero suggested discussing an important issue first. He noted that the residential area had already been defined, gesturing towards it. Masaru explained that the area marked with a white line was for the foundations of houses. One of the residents asked about the reasons for this choice and wanted to understand them. Meanwhile, Masaru continued his explanation and called it land planning, as is common in his world. He pointed out that when building houses, workshops, and stores, many factors must be taken into account, including the flow of people and noise insulation. The elder listened attentively, and he added that proper placement not only simplifies organization, but also reduces the risk of various problems. He also reminded that one should not forget about the threat from wild animals. Then he continued his speech with the second reason. He later said that construction of the sewer system could now begin, as the slugs had been declared safe. He noted that all homes would have sewage systems, and explained the scheme for draining rainwater and wastewater to the river via treatment plants. Adelina learned that this was part of his lectures on hygiene and praised the little girl for her attentiveness. He added that this is important for cleanliness and safety, but he sternly objected when one of the residents suggested making small toilets in the houses. Masaru then gave the example of an unsanitary city where human waste causes diseases to spread. He noted that in such conditions, infections can be transmitted through contaminated water and cause epidemics. The girls expressed a desire to avoid such problems in the new city. He emphasized the importance of sanitation and added that this discussion, although unpleasant, was necessary. He decided to move on to the last but not least important factor. Masaru showed a plot of land allocated for one house and explained that the boundaries were marked with a white line. The residents called out to Masaru to tell him about their problems and requests. They expressed concern as they had a family of 6 and asked for a larger plot. He replied that there was nothing to worry about since all the houses would be 2-story and made of stone. In conclusion, he noted that living in such houses would be even more comfortable than it seemed. Residents were amazed by the news of the 2-story stone buildings and responded with enthusiasm to the prospect. They asked to start construction as soon as possible, not believing their luck. The girl in armor explained that such buildings are usually found in hotels or shopping areas, and that not everyone can afford to live there. The guy explained that in the capital, the type of house is determined by status. Ordinary people live in buildings made of wood and straw, merchants in brick houses, and aristocrats in stone buildings. He noted that in their new city, such differences did not matter, so everyone was happy. Residents responded enthusiastically to his words, and unanimously supported the idea of continuing construction. Masaru then suggested moving on to a discussion of architecture, and showed a column that he had built together with others. The residents examined the structure, and one of them realized that the previously seen reflection was indeed the foundation of the house. He pointed to the metal frame of the building and promised to explain the technologies used later. The young man suggested finishing the construction together today. The resident was surprised by the structure and asked how stable it was. The guy explained that it was a wooden frame assembled without nails, only with the help of bars with special notches, like a puzzle. He then talked about the importance of remembering the order of actions. He noted that stone blocks will be placed between the columns. He then pointed out that another layer would need to be laid on top. The girls happily reported that they had already started assembling it with their sister. Masaru explained how to make lime mortar by boiling slaked lime with seaweed and mixing it with hemp. He showed that it would produce a thick mass that would strengthen stone walls when applied. The girl was surprised to learn that such a mixture is also used for road construction. He added that slaked lime is like a secret weapon. In conclusion, the girl thought about what Masaru does for a living. The guy said that he used to select materials for production, and at the same time studied by helping the craftsmen. He admitted that he feels at home in the village, although he cannot work at a professional level. However, thanks to his accumulated experience, he can make different things, such as processing leather, but he began to wonder about the illegality of some of his projects. May asked in surprise if this meant that her brother was a bad person, since his actions could violate the laws. The guy answered evasively, without denying it completely. The boy admitted that he may have gone too far in the past, but now he strives to be useful to others. He encouraged the younger girl, explaining that this was the main thing. She was touched, apologized, and hugged him, and the older sister commented on the situation with restraint. He then distributed the materials to the areas and suggested that they get to work. Everyone enthusiastically agreed and began to act. May happily urged everyone to build a cool city, and the girl in armor supported her with restraint. The residents gathered to work with enthusiasm. The guy, watching what was happening, raised his finger with a confident smile, as if summing up the work he had started. The villagers actively took up the construction. Some installed the frames, others brought materials and did the finishing. The guy supervised the process, helping and supervising the work. The construction went smoothly, and soon neat two-story houses were built in a row at the foot of the mountains on the site of the vacant lot. A month passed, and the settlement was completely transformed. Instead of an empty lot, there were now neat, solid buildings with paved streets. Residents were doing their daily business, relaxing and socializing. The guy noted with satisfaction that everything began to look completely different, and the girl with ears happily praised him for the work he had done. Masaru was showing the girl with ears how to sit properly in the restroom, showing a confident pose. He saw no need to explain further. Then the girl took him aside, sheepishly expressing her confusion. Down below, the scene moved on to work as they continued installing the pieces, and the guy noted that after mass production, everything would be finished unless there were any problems. The guy praised the residents for the work they had done, noting that the city had grown significantly. The young man said that although everything was fine with housing, it was necessary to think about developing industry. May scolded Masaru for not listening to her and asked him again if he understood what she was talking about. He gently patted the little girl with the ears on the head, and she, with a serious expression, reminded him not to take everything on himself. She promised that they could do it together, and, with a wink, responded approvingly to his silent agreement. A rabbit-eared villager ran up to the boy with disturbing news. There was a problem at the entrance to the city. The boy and girl were surprised and immediately asked what was going on. At first he assumed that the cause could be fallen materials, but he was told that it was something completely different. The guy asked tensely what exactly the problem was. Masaru watched in shock as he learned that humans were found at the entrance to the city. There were wounded soldiers lying on the ground, and he suddenly recognized a familiar face among them. The villagers were discussing the sudden arrival of a group of people belonging to the human race. They were discussing whether Riza had been defeated, as well as Masaru. The knight confirmed their words and, noticing the familiar furniture in the house, realized that this place was indeed connected to those who helped them. One of them confirmed that they were expelled from the port city. The eldest knight, looking at the fighters lying in the hall, confidently declared that they were knights of the kingdom of Gratius. His words caused alarm among those sitting at the table. Masaru, Adelina, and the village chief listened tensely. The knight expressed his gratitude for the help and introduced himself as Fried, the royal knight of the shield. He pointed to his companions. Behind him stood a boy named Dista, and in the bed lay the wounded Cordo. The warrior girl noticed that they belonged to knights of a higher rank. Fried then respectfully noted the boy's ability in restoration magic and asked his name. The guy introduced himself as Masaru, after which there was a short pause. The girl began to defend Masaru after he introduced himself as an ordinary traveler and said that he had an excellent rank. She then explained that her name was Adelina and that she was the niece of the lord of the coastal city. The knight asked in surprise whether it was really Lord Lancelot himself who was being spoken of. He noted that his heroism was known throughout the kingdom. She noted that she was in the city as an ally, and the knight concluded that the leader had good connections. The elder said with concern that, under the guise of these good connections, they had come again to attack the village like last time. The knights explained that they were ready to lend a helping hand in an emergency. The village elder said that he learned an important thing from the boy. People are different. The knight then explained that their party was pursuing a demonic beast, which was directly related to the safety of the king. Having heard the details, the boy realized with horror that they were talking about a six-legged creature with dark skin. However, the knight said that it was a one-horned demonic horse. Masaru anxiously asked if they were talking about that same demonic horse. He added that the creature was eaten by another animal. The knight explained that during the chase, they were attacked by a demonic bear. Because of this, their detachment was scattered, and the remnants of the army wandered through the forest for about a week. The knights warned him that staying in this place was also dangerous and offered to join the kingdom. The boy admitted that it was not easy to talk about it, but he noted that they got rid of the bear. He confidently reported that the area had already become safe. One of the knights couldn't believe what he was hearing, wondering how such a thing could have happened. The guy added that they had also dealt with that demonic horse, and suggested that they examine the bodies of the 3 bears if they still had doubts. One of the knights jumped up from his seat, asking in surprise whether they really had a horse corpse. The boy reacted with bewilderment, not understanding why this caused such a violent reaction. The knight apologized for interrupting, and Masaru wondered where he got such an interest. One of the older knights asked for a moment's wait, and looking at Masaru, he noted that judging by their reactions, the horse's corpse was indeed valuable. He added that it was at least worth some attention. The chief knight, with a polite smile, explained that it was about the corpse of a horse, and asked that it be handed over to them. The guy asked again in surprise, not immediately understanding the meaning of the request. Then he thought out loud, noting that, in theory, he should have refused. Nevertheless, he smiled, and the knight opposite noticeably relaxed, realizing that the agreement could work out. The guy explained with a smile that the bear had only damaged the animal's neck, and the rest of the body was intact. He admitted that he had kept the carcass because he considered it suitable as raw material, noting that despite its small size, the skin and 6 legs were in excellent condition. He looked at his interlocutor, who nodded approvingly. The head knight excitedly reported that the creature had a horn on its head. The boy immediately confirmed this, grinning and saying bingo. He added that it would be a shame to miss out on something like that. After a short pause, he proposed a deal, hinting that if the knight was truly royal, he might be able to afford to buy what he needed. The officer admitted that, as the young man had noted, the raw material could be quite valuable if it were to reach the market. He clarified that he had not asked for it to be given away for free, and even added that there was a reward for the destruction of the demonic horse. The man suggested calling it a deal, promising decent pay. The guy thought about it, but realized the main value was not the metal, but the horn, which was mentioned several times as a special part of the creature's body. The young man thoughtfully considered the value of money, coming to the conclusion that it in itself was not as important as honor and status. He recalled the scene where he was supposedly initiated into the nobility. Although he was interested in the reward for the horse, he knew that the knights would probably offer less than the market value. The young man said with a confident smile that he would go to the kingdom with the knights. Everyone present was immediately surprised by his decision, and could not contain their emotional reaction. The guy confidently stated that he would conduct the negotiations himself, since he had previously participated in the hunt with the others. He suggested using cotton as a material, noting its potential for sale in the kingdom. The chief knight admitted that they were dealing with merchants, but warned that he could not guarantee the success of the negotiations and did not want the young man to get too carried away. Masaru enthusiastically declared that they would both succeed, and with a confident smile, he clenched his fist and, without hiding his emotions, exclaimed that he was beside himself with joy. The warrior nodded approvingly, having listened to the interlocutors, and expressed his consent. Adelina stood up, confidently raising her hand, and expressed her readiness. The young man confirmed the decision with a joyful smile. The young warrior enthusiastically explained the plan, gesturing as they did so to regain control of the area. May asked again indignantly, not believing what she heard. The young man suggested avoiding conflict by leading his companions down the street, despite the possible danger. Adelina gave him a measured compliment on his efforts as she watched the proceedings. The young craftsman was putting his hand to the wall of the building, demonstrating how the restoration of the facade was going. May watched him, and Adelina brought the boards. The guy said that there were still several sections to complete, and clarified the supply details. Adelina explained that there was indeed storage space, but it was not for current projects. The young man enthusiastically announced that the area at the foot of the mountain could become a public bathing area. He explained that for him, as a Japanese, hot springs are a necessity. The two companions watched his enthusiastic story with surprise, trying to understand the meaning of his words. The young man explained that with the sewer system they would no longer have to wash with stale water. May was delighted, and the fair-haired companion clarified that, in the past, such amenities were only in houses on a hill. The guy thought about hot springs. He asked them if they knew anything about hot springs. The boy explained that he used his map skill to find an area with underground water, He encouraged the girls that they would be able to successfully complete the task with their skills, and he suggested returning to the study of sources later and noted that it was worth preparing for the trip in advance. Adelina reminded that she was talking about business, not about a hike. The warrior enthusiastically reminded about the goddess and pointed to the temple, causing surprise in the girl with ears. The young builder seemed to have forgotten about the statue, and when Adelina reminded him of it, he did not look happy. The little companion cheerfully supported the idea, adding that the temple was needed to receive a blessing. The young man agreed with a smile, calling it an excellent idea. He assumed that the goddess would not be working here and that she was fine. The guy calmly stated that the chosen material would not work and suggested choosing another one. The warrior reminded that the main thing was to receive the goddess's blessing. Adelina agreed, deciding to clarify her wish with the goddess. The guy nodded approvingly, and they proceeded to the beginning of construction. Suddenly, a goddess appeared before everyone and politely greeted the young man named Masaru. She said that she had come to help him with his work. The warrior with ears did not immediately believe that a real goddess was in front of her, and the guy thanked her with a smile for her timely appearance. The goddess remembered how people often frightened her before, but now she felt calm. She confirmed that she had not come just like that, but really to help. Adelina happily acknowledged her, and May was surprised with her hair that she saw a real goddess in front of her. She noted that she had received the message and explained that she had found a way to come and support him in person. A new guest appeared before the main characters, a sorceress and goddess named Ayla Saphira. She introduced herself with a smile and expressed her joy at meeting the master, emphasizing her intention to take part in what was happening. The other characters watched her appearance with curiosity and slight surprise. The guy, turning to the girl with long hair, clarified her name, Ayla Saphira, and asked again if she was Victor's sister. The girl with the crown said that she was grateful for the work done. She said that she and her sisters had enjoyed watching him. One of the characters wondered if the goddess had really decided to open up, showing not only her beauty but also her pure mind. He noted that she was the most like a real goddess. The hero said that he was also glad to meet her, and expressed a desire to ask a question. She asked how she could help. Masaru replied that she had an idea and that they could discuss the magic that had been discussed earlier. The woman with the crown suggested putting off the serious issues for later and starting with something easy. Then she cheerfully declared that the decision had been made. Saphira invited everyone to the table, saying that she had prepared a special place for everyone. The guy was surprised, noticing that everything looked like the magic of the vault skill. The girl explained that the skill really helps, but does not do everything itself. You need to make an effort. Saphira said that in this world there are no things that are taken for granted. She added that skills should help a person, making his life easier and more diverse. The guy agreed with their words and wondered if it was worth looking for a special use for each skill. The girl replied that if we limit ourselves to this, it will be impossible to change the purpose of the skills, and noticed that he was thinking in the wrong direction. The girl said that she felt that magic was his path, so she suggested developing it. She added that he would be able to master his skills. Masaru admitted that he wanted to have an image only for himself. The woman exclaimed in surprise that this was a difficult question, and then suggested discussing the topic of the image. The girls asked again, surprised and embarrassed, if it was really about the image, and one of them loudly asked if it was that important. They asked the hero to return before the rainy season and reminded him not to forget. The girl said she was very happy and happily agreed. The hero responded a little hesitantly, but made it clear that he felt the same way. The girl said that she would help him when they returned home and suggested that they part on a good note. The girl added that if he felt the same way, then maybe he also had an image. The second girl said that she had one image and offered to send it if he liked it. At the same time, she admitted that the image only shows the outer side. One of the heroes gave the image to the girl, and she appeared in a rabbit costume with a tray in her hands. She said no in embarrassment, but despite this, the image was received. The friend asked in surprise if he really wanted this. The guy jumped up in panic, saying that he did not want this image, and tried to stop the process. The girl, embarrassed, exclaimed that she agreed and mentioned 3 surprises. The other one watched her in surprise. The guy, smiling, noted that he didn't care and added that he didn't care whether the correct value was given. Masaru thought that the people helping him create the statue were unable to see his true feelings. One of the girls said indignantly that she could not believe that the other used such a cowardly trick to reveal a girl's secret. The other, in response, noted that she considered it wrong and did not ask for it. Masaru watched the huge fireball in the sky in amazement. He realized that it was real magic and noted that the girls were actually using fire. A powerful pillar of magical energy appeared above the village, causing all the villagers to turn around and step aside in alarm. One of the girls exclaimed in surprise, asking what was going on. The second, stunned by what she saw, suddenly declared that she wanted to become a student. Masaru looked at the crater in surprise, not understanding what had happened. He noted that he had succeeded. The girl with the ears said that it was his fault. The second girl clarified that Masaru should not have touched the goddess, because he was forbidden to do so. Another member of the group added that Masaru had managed to hit the mark at the right moment. Masaru asked with confusion if it was really his fault. She stated that the reaction from the others was excessive. He responded by thinking that both girls looked great and didn't see anything wrong with it. Masaru thought he didn't know what it was, but maybe it had something to do with a woman's heart, or even a goddess's heart. He blushed, feeling embarrassed. Then there was a noise, and one of the characters asked what it was. Several others turned around worriedly, wondering what had happened. One of the girls demanded that everyone stop, stating that it was their right. Then the official announcement was made. The goddess Victinius and the goddess Isla Saphira were standing before them. Both women, hearing this, turned to the speaker. One of the inhabitants loudly exclaimed that the gods of this world were descending upon them. At the table, several girls accused Masaru of being rude. He asked what was going on, and one of them emphasized that the blame lay with him. One of the girls remarked on how divine and beautiful the goddess was. Another irritatedly reminded him that if you do not thank the goddess, you can turn into a monkey. Masaru panicked and shouted that he had not forgotten, and then asked in surprise if he was being scolded too harshly. The inhabitants greeted the goddesses with respect. One of the goddesses admitted that she was having a hard time coping with what was happening. The second said that she was not at all used to such attention. She added that the god, as a rule, does not come down to earth except during ceremonies and holidays. The goddess asked how long ago he had become a wolf. The boy replied that he did not think it was necessary to discuss it now. The woman reminded him that they still had a few questions to discuss about magic. He said that he was here because something had actually happened. The goddess reminded him that he knew what she was talking about. She said that she wanted to talk about crabs, if she still had the opportunity. The guy asked in amazement if he had heard right. What kind of crab was she talking about? Era said that she had already eaten them and they were very tasty. When Masaru was told about the statue, one of the girls admitted that she used it as an excuse, because even her sister was a bad goddess. She was sad. Masaru just sighed and said that nothing could be done. Masaru turned to the villagers and said that Victoria had announced that they had something to do. Masaru noted that they needed to go to another city. He asked why they hadn't tried to prepare everything he had mentioned before, if they were going to leave anyway. He reminded them that they needed to start with the first step. Masaru said that they would first disinfect the soil. He then added that they needed to carefully study the local plants. He pointed out that if they found edible ones, they would be able to obtain food safely. He suggested expanding the crops right there to create a real city. Several of the rabbit villagers in Adelina ran out into the street enthusiastically, happy with their newfound freedom. Masaru stayed inside with the goddess, watching the events unfold. He noted with a smile that even she had succumbed to temptation, and then shared his thoughts about the independence of his companions and the confidence that they could cope on their own. The young man spoke about his plans for landscaping the site and noted the advantages of installing gazebos and creating a garden. He also said that the neighbors would not hear the noise and would improve sun protection and ventilation. He explained that he had been involved in gardening before and wanted to apply his accumulated knowledge. The goddess listened carefully to his thoughts and admitted that the idea did indeed make sense. The young man smiled and remarked that the statue and the temple looked good, but the rest of the city should be decorated just as well. He suggested that the goddess might want to play if the opportunity arose. The goddess looked at him carefully and said with a slight agreement that if that was the case, she did not mind. One of the goddesses asked with interest if it was possible to come and play every time. The other goddess happily confirmed that of course it was possible and turned to Masaru with a request. Meanwhile, the young man found himself in the center of attention of two goddesses at once, causing him confusion. The young man tried to remain cautious, but he could not resist the gaze of the two goddesses. Both looked at him with pleading eyes, which finally broke his resolve. He looked at them in confusion, and then reluctantly agreed. The divine companions exclaimed joyfully, and one of them promised to treat him every time they met. The hero addressed the goddesses with a request, calling them by name. He wanted a serious conversation, but his directness shocked and confused them. The girls reacted to his demand with indignation. However, he insisted, reminding her of magic and hinting that it was time to give answers. Isla Saphira agreed to discuss everything after the meal and cheerfully raised her finger. Victinius asked doubtfully what she should do. The boy wondered if they would be able to cope when the time came, and reminded them that they shouldn't rely on strength alone. Soon the three of them went to the office, where they had to make an important decision. Masaru stood and looked at the city with a determined expression, saying that he simply needed the blessing of the goddess to win. Victinius watched him silently, not interfering, as he continued to ponder the upcoming events. A few days later, Freed arrived in the royal capital of Gradus. He knelt before the throne and reported that he was ready to deliver a message from the king, and that the rest of the squad would arrive in the city tomorrow. The Supreme King sat on the throne and with a serious expression ordered his subordinate to obtain the horn of the demonic beast. He looked down intently and sternly asked if the subordinate understood the order. 2 weeks later, the heroes arrived in the capital. The young man noted that he had not expected that someone would be sent to meet him in his carriage. Another asked him how the trip had gone. He said was surprised that this couldn't be because it was too far. He added that they had been traveling for 7 days and he was very tired. The boy complained that the road was too long. The other replied that he shouldn't complain, because he had been riding in a cart the whole time and it wasn't that hard. The hero complained that his hips were hurting badly. The other, sighing, told him to do what he wanted. Then he exclaimed that they had finally arrived. After speaking with the goddesses, he went to the royal capital with Freed, who had quickly recovered, to sell the demonic beast. On the way, he noticed that there were many knights in the city, which he realized were led by someone who had been the leader of one of the previous cities. This time, he reflected on his impressions and the diet. The man told Masaru to try his best, because he was capable of doing whatever he wanted. The boy said that if Long said so, then of course it was true. He reminded them that it was Hibict who had struck them all down and made him a slave. The man responded by saying that he knew that too. The elder said that the shop owner had told Freed that he was like Masaru. He suggested that deep down, Masaru may not have wanted to do this, but he had to leave for the sake of his successor and the people. He concluded with regret that he felt that there was nothing that could be done. They reflected on how time and envy ruin everyone. One of them admitted that, although he did not want to blame the children and the city for these feelings, he still did not care a little. He said he just wanted everyone to be happy and added that if there was an order for a deal, he was ready. Masaru admitted that he was lost in thought because he wanted to help the rabbit family too. When asked if he was even listening, he apologized, explaining that he was lost in his thoughts. The man reminded them that he had already spoken about the need to visit Dista and asked them to wait for him. He also explained that they were here, firstly, for an audience with the king. The second man added that, as he had already mentioned, goods from the entire continent could be found in this place. The young man remarked that he had never seen such fruit before and decided that he should try one. His companion tried to attract his attention and reminded him that he had to sort out the king's business first, since he had already heard everything. He added that the young man should find out everything himself. Before parting, he said that the young man would have to wait for him somewhere. The man said he was going to the Adventurers Guild and asked to wait for him there. He asked if his companion would get lost. The man replied that he just wanted to know more before meeting the king. In the end, the man asked with irritation to follow him faster. The protagonist, upon entering the guild, noticed that there were many people inside. He was surprised that this was the kingdom's guild. The administrator girl approached him and asked if he wanted to receive an order or make a request. Upon hearing this, he asked if she was talking to him, and she confirmed that she was, and welcomed him to the Adventurers Guild. The protagonist said that he wanted to take up the work of an adventurer, and so he came to find out the details. The girl, hearing this, clarified what exactly he wanted to know. Masaru politely asked if it was true that monsters could be sold here. He said that he had heard that they could be exchanged for coins. He then clarified that he wanted to know the purchase price of some monsters. The hero said he understood when he was told that he should go to the next window to ask about the price of monsters. The salesman asked if he wanted to know the price of some monsters. Then he asked if he had the materials on hand or if he was just curious. The hero answered that this was true and laughed. The salesman added that newbies often ask such questions. The seller explained that normal monster materials can be sold for copper or silver coins, but adventurers are better off. The hero noted that money decides everything in this world. He added that the price depends on the type and size of the monster. Even normal ones can be expensive, magical ones from 100 silver, and dragons and demons up to hundreds of gold. The most expensive demonic beast. The seller said that the power of the demonic beast is different from that of demons. It combines the power of the beast and the demon. He added that even 200 knights can barely cope with such a creature, and its cost is so high that it can even lead to war. The protagonist was shocked to realize that the cost was millions of yen. He couldn't believe that they had such an expensive material and began to reproach himself for not paying attention. Then he thought that he should have spoken more quietly and tried to justify himself by saying that he had meant something completely different. One of the characters asked Masaru suspiciously what he was doing in the guild. Masaru tried to justify himself, noting that he was getting worse at hiding the truth each time. He also added that he just wanted to be of some help and was looking forward to meeting the king with interest. The older character asked Masaru to avoid unnecessary trouble. In response, Masaru only reassured him, saying that everything would be fine. One of the guards demanded to know their identity. After they were identified, the Royal Shield Corps said they would let them through and ordered the road to be opened. The man said they were going to see the king, and the other praised him for his excellent work. The characters arrived at the court, where they were met by the king. One of them approached the throne to announce his arrival and perhaps begin the audience. As they entered the hall, the king was surprised to think that he recognized one of the newcomers. One of the heroes realized that he was indeed standing before the king and reminded himself to be dignified. Despite the demand to kneel, he was determined to follow his own principles. One of the men sternly demanded that everyone pay attention. The other, visibly surprised, cried out, not understanding what was happening. Narumi introduced himself, adding that he could simply be called Masaru. To this, the king replied that he, Axion, was the ruler of the kingdom of Graitessa. One of those present exclaimed in surprise, not believing that the king himself was in front of him. And someone was indignant, calling Masaru a fool for giving his full name. The king, in a particularly good mood, said he would forgive Masaru for the first time. He asked him to be more careful, but decided not to attach importance to the mistake this time. The king cautioned Masaru to be careful, because good moods are easily ruined and grievances take a long time to heal. Then he handed the floor over to Fried. Fried reported that the beastmen had built cities in the mountains and had managed to defeat Masa. He brought Masaru, who had the monster's material. The king praised Fried, saying that he had done well. Masaru showed the skull of a monstrous unicorn and said that it was the skull of one of the beasts. The king declared with delight that it was definitely a demonic beast. He noted that even half of such a head would already be an enormous fortune, and offered to reward Masaru and his companion appropriately. One of the courtiers offered to take a closer look at the skull, and Masaru demanded that it be returned. Masaru said with a smile that he would refuse the reward, which caused considerable surprise among those around him. Masaru explained that he had brought the head of the demon beast not as an offering, but for negotiations, emphasizing that it belonged to him. He said that he would listen to the king's proposal and think about it, to which the king smirked and noted that Masaru had decided to bargain. Masaru asked ironically if the king really wanted to get something from him, as if he were a parasite. This remark clearly offended the monarch, making him angry, and one of the courtiers very nervous. The king was indignant that Masaru dared to look down on him, as if he were a lonely woman without a family or husband. He sarcastically remarked that Masaru was lucky to be allowed to behave like that. The king was furious and said that he would not forgive this, and demanded that Masaru explain what was on his mind. Masaru thought that the king looked really scary and terrifying when he was angry. Masaru, admitting that he had said too much, apologized to the king, and noted that this time he had really used his position bravely. He admitted that the king was not just a man, but something more, a favorite, of the people. In response, the king emphasized that only the one appointed by the gods could be a true king, because that is why people like him are above ordinary people. Masaru said that he had heard about the coronation ceremony and admitted that he had heard a lot about the king. He added that the king seemed to be too carried away by drinking. These words embarrassed the king, who abruptly ordered the conversation to cease. The king, losing his patience, shouted loudly several times for everyone to be quiet and demanded that the argument stop. He approached Masaru and repeated that he had had enough. The king asked Masaru with disdain what he could have heard, and known if he was only a commoner. He reminded him that even at the coronation ceremony, the captain of the guard was only admitted if he was related. Masaru, smiling, replied that he had heard enough and had summoned someone. Masaru exclaimed with surprise and joy that it was Victinius in front of him. Victinius said she had kept her promise, adding that she had hoped that they would manage without her. She clarified that it was the first time she had been called, and asked if Masaru had been rude.